potwierdzili, że zainspirowali się pomysłem, który jeden z graczy im dał na ExileConie, gdzie powiedział ktoś, ej, ale by było fajnie, jakbyście zrobili gem, który pozwala kastować rolując w PoE2. RiceQT zasugerował, Polak rodak, kochany, że fajnie by było, jakby skorzystali z tego systemu pauzy i wykorzystali go w taki sposób, że jak zdisconnectujesz, to żeby po prostu spauzowało. Kolejna rzecz. Zwiększą nam pick-up radius. Będziemy mogli z większej odległości rozmawiać z NPC-ami, zbierać loot, czy też otwierać drzwi. Widzowie, czy na streamie, czy na YouTubie. Zapraszam was do seansu, będziemy oglądać wywiad tych oto panów, Polaka, rodaka, kochanego RiceQT, z GIGA oraz z Nugiena, z Rorym i Jonathanem, czyli no, jedni z dwóch jakby najważniejszych osób, jeśli chodzi o Path of Exile 2. Zobaczmy.
It's good.
Awesome.
So we have a lot of interesting questions today, and we're going to jump straight into them, if that's all right with you fine folks.
Right.
And I've been curious about... So it was originally announced that the Path of Exile 1 and 2 endgames would be combined and would be a joined thing.
Tak, PoE
Now
1
that
i
we've
PoE
had the
2
announcement that the two games are separate,
miały być połączone.
what is
a nie
exactly
będą.
the plan for endgame now?
So we aren't yet announcing the full plan, but we have got a design. The overall kind of like, I guess like approach is very similar to what we're doing now, as far as like it's going to have maps in it, right? Like that's the
Oczywiście będzie mapping w PoE
main
2.
thing.
Musi być.
But like the specifics, I want to be quite different. Like I want it to feel quite different than how it felt before. Like so that we can do something that feels like it's an evolution. So yeah, we've got a plan for it. The end game is going to be in the beta, so you will get to experience that. We'll sort of
And the
announce it
game
a little
będzie
bit
w
closer to
becie.
when the beta's happening. But I guess like, you know,
czerwcu.
a lot of questions people have about like, you know, how much access to content will there be as far as like, you know, number of things you can add to a map and all these kind of things. Like those are questions that we'll be announcing a little bit closer. But if you have any sort of more specific concerns about it, I'm happy to address them.
So they're not going to be a combined endgame at all now anymore? Like that?
No, they're not. They're going to be separate. And I think that now that they're separate games, it just, you know, it just makes sense for them to be separate. And like all the bosses from campaign of PoE 2 will come in the end game in the end game as well, and that kind of stuff. So it'll just end up being quite different.
Yeah, so obviously like a whole bunch of different map bosses and things like that. But will we see a big divergence in like the structure of them? How we have like atlas passive trees and things like that?
Well, I mean, it's sort of hard to sort of tread the line here of what to say about this because
Nie wiedzą, co
there are
powiedzieć,
changes, but
ale-
as I said, I think it will feel quite different while mechanically not removing anything that can currently be done, if you know what I mean. That's kind of at least what I'm trying to go for. If that's like enough of a hint, I guess, for you.
Yeah.
Which
Może podgłośnie chłopaków
which I
trochę,
guess is
co?
what we've got here.
No, I get it, but I have to say I'm just like in love with the current endgame state of Path of Exile 1, so looking forward to seeing how you
Well,
build.
I'll tell you what, the thing that people do love about it is the fact that there are lots of different things you can do, and there's also the ability to choose what it is that you what it is that you want to do. And I think those are the philosophies that we want to make sure that we're
Right.
retaining as much as possible, and even amplifying in the base system. Like I want to make sure that like that feeling of like, oh yeah, I can choose what type of content I'm doing is definitely a core part of what we're designing there.
All right, wonderful. Rise.
Czyli Jonathan bardzo mówi, że lubi to, że obecnie gracze mogą bardzo customizować swój mapping experience i chcą, żeby jeszcze bardziej mogli customizować swój mapping experience w dwójce.
Will you still be able to one-shot entire maps and Ubers, or do you want to scale everything back? GGG has been quite vague in answering this in the past, leaving many players confused about the direction of PoE 2's gameplay compared to PoE 1.
I mean, yeah, we never designed the PoE 1 Uber bosses to be one shot. That's not part of the core philosophy. Is how does this fight feel when it ends in half a second? But
Yeah, of course.
yeah, there's definitely when we are looking towards all these bosses, even the campaign bosses, it's making sure that the challenge is intense for where you're planned to be and what your power level is and so on. And that does mean for many boss fights, when they're really epic, they're gonna last, and the boss is gonna push everything it can at you to try and take you on, and it's a challenge to beat it. And it's natural for characters' power to grow, especially as they outgrow the content. So we can expect, because we give the players huge numbers of tools, they will find ways to use and abuse them to do crazy things. That's just part of the game, and as players raise the bar, we'll raise the bar for challenge as well.
I think people underestimate the degree to which like people learning the game has changed the ability for people to be good at the game. Like when PoE 2 comes out, there might be ways that are in there to be able to do that stuff that we don't know about. But like, that's just by the nature of the fact that we tend to be very kind of like, we give people a lot of tools, right? We give them also, and they're able to combine them in interesting ways. But like, what I expect to happen is that at the start, people won't be able to do that level of power just because they haven't worked out the builds yet. If you know, what I mean. So
nie chcą.
as that kind of like as that stuff is worked out over time, that stuff will then come. It's sort of like interesting. I've actually had a conversation with Mark quite a few times recently about like, well, why it felt like a few years ago this sort of exponentialness of PoE kind of like exploded a bit, and we kind of had a lot of discussions about like why is that the case, like what sort of happened, and it's kind of a combination of different factors, I think, that happened, which I guess is a bit of a non-answer, but like some of it really is just people learning to understand, like optimizing and understanding how all of that stuff works to a degree that they can now do the kind of things that they can do, as well as us just adding stuff. Like it isn't entirely just power creep on our end, it's power creep on the players learning the game better too. So yeah, I suspect that things will get a bit of a reset just from the fact that all the mechanics are so different, all the skills and all.
Czyli generalnie powiedzieli, że nie chcą, żeby gracze trywializowali PoE 2 od razu i one-shotowali Uberów, ale są otwarci na to, że w grze zostaną sposoby, żeby to robić, takie, o których nawet oni na razie nie wymyślili, tylko gracze będą musieli sami to wymyślić.
It's very possible. It's very possible, yeah. Well, I mean, the other interesting thing is how fast in PoE 2 do those kinds of tools become as good. I mean, I imagine it will be faster, right? Just because.
Pytaniem jest, jak szybko ludzie wymyślą najbardziej optymalne.
Mechanically, a lot of things are changing under the hood, right? Like just like base things that you've been able to rely on a lot, you know, in terms of like just the base equations for how defenses work and things like that change a bit, and then that has large knock-on effects to the game. So, you know, like. People will have to work out like what the repercussions of all that is again, I think. But I mean, at the same time, like I imagine the tools will be made quite quickly.
I imagine you're quite excited for that reset, right? Like I
am.
Absolutely.
Sure. It's huge. Like it's absolutely great to be able to just be like, okay, nothing is off the table for changes now. You know, like we are able to do whatever we think might need to be changed. We are able to look at it again. It is great.
And every time we change one of those mechanics, it results in 10 other systems having to be rethought. And then those 10 systems require 10 systems each to be rethought. So it changes a lot.
Like, I mean, we have definitely not fully explored the repercussions ourselves of all of the stuff that we've changed, for sure, right? Like, there will have to be a lot of more work in that stuff, I have no doubt.
It's kind of our job as well.
Absolutely.
Nuki, could you take us for the next question, mate?
Sure. In the previous interview, you spoke about a difference in drops between, let's say, a novice and a very experienced player, being in like a factor of even thousands, say.
1,000.
Yeah. But with PoE 2, at least from what I can see, you tend to show that there is a bit of a flatter curve, if that makes sense, in terms of power gain.
I think
so. Do you just to like finish? Do you intend to force like the like this difference through other means, or will it be something that we will get later on, and maybe the gap will be like, let's say, smaller in the beginning because there is less potential for power?
Well, okay, so first of all, I wouldn't... The word force there, I think, kind of doesn't quite exactly...
Ale zamotał, co? No Wien pyta o dropy. Różnice w dropach między topowymi graczami a średnimi. Ale strasznie zamotał pytanie, trochę go nie skumałem.
The ability to make your character better to a large degree. Otherwise, what do you even have, right? Like, if the difference between a good player and a bad player is 10x, like, well, I mean, I don't think you've got enough of a game there. Like that, and the funny thing is 10x may even sound like a good thing if you're like to someone who isn't really kind of, I guess, being around the block with this stuff. Like, it may feel like, oh yeah, like a good player is 10 times faster. But the thing is that there's so many things that factor on top of it. Like, you can have a 10 times difference in clear speed as just one element, and then you can have a 10 times difference in damage as well.
Jonathan
And once
sugeruje,
you've got a 10 times difference in
że
damage, that means
postać dobrego
that you
gracza
can have,
nie powinna być 10 razy silniejsza, tylko o wiele więcej. Nie
the
powiedział
person
ile,
who
ale
do
może
hard
100
content,
razy
of course,
silniejsza.
if
na
they
przykład.
are going to multiply the content difficulty that
Tak
they're
jak
going to be
obecnie.
able to do in some way by 10x, they expect 10x rewards, or maybe they don't expect 10x, but they expect certainly a bump in rewards that is commensurate with the difficulty increase, right? And then
even just having done a map many times, you know the layout, you know
Right,
which
right.
encounters you can rush it and
Yes.
which ones
Right,
you can
right.
hold
There's
back.
like many
And
things.
that's another 10 times on
Right,
top
right.
of those other things, so you quickly multiply to that 1,000.
Absolutely, like getting to 1,000 is honestly like the challenge is not so much getting to 1,000. The challenge is not getting above 1,000. That is like the that is the hard part. And like PoE 1 is absolutely in the 100,000 times territory, I believe, right now. We're kind of looking at where we're kind of at as far as like where that is. And so that this is a scaling back. And I think that
Right.
people maybe hear 1,000 times and think that like yeah, like I think they get the
Jonathan
wrong
żali
idea
się, że obecnie
about
problem
that.
z PoE w Affliction jest taki,
So
że
like
lud
that's going to change things.
na
I think one of
topowych
the other things
mapach
I've
nie
seen
jest
on Reddit
1000
and so on
razy
as well
lepszy
recently is like the
niż na
concern
nowskiej
about
mapie,
like,
tylko na przykład 100
does
tysięcy
this
razy
mean I'm going to
lepszy.
have to be using Magic Find gear and stuff like that? And I guess I did want to talk about that as well because that is something that people have been worried about, I guess. And I actually had another conversation with Chris about this because I needed to kind of refresh my memory of like. So I literally said to Chris, like, Chris, I want you to pitch me from scratch again on why Magic Find gear is good. Because I need like I need a refresher course on this again, and it really comes down to
To jest mega ciekawe.
like you need your game to have some axis of scaling that isn't just DPS. Like there has like having some other element. It just means that there's another factor to consider in your character build, and I guess that that's a thing that we do believe in, that it is important. Which isn't to say like, but it needs to be competitive, right? It cannot be the case. That,
Jonathan poszedł do
Magic Find
Chrisa
should outcompete
zapytać Krzysztofa,
damage.
Krzysztof,
Like, you
powiedz
need
mi,
to-
czemu
there
my
needs
w
to be
ogóle
some balance
potrzebujemy
there.
Magic
But
Finda
it's
w tej
like, it's
grze?
another thing to optimize for. At the point when
I
you've
Krzysztof
gotten your DPS to the point where
Wilczyński,
you can
Chris
take down
Wilson
anything,
wytłumaczył mu, że
having the
muszą
ability
mieć
to, okay, now I want to be able to do that at the same time
inny
as also
sposób
having
skalowania
MF gear
postaci niż
is
tylko
like
ich
something
siła.
that can add to that. So I think that's kind of the reason why it is important. If you don't have that, then like I mean, it's similar to the balance between damage and defenses, right? Like it's just another. There's like a kind of triangle of factors you have to consider in your build. So it's
Ale
just
podoba mi
it's
się,
just
że
something to consider.
podważają
Why
takie
do you
rzeczy,
think-
że są gotowi na
Why do you think
dyskusje
Magic Find gear
wewnętrzne.
is
Wśród
unpopular
CEO
amongst,
firmy, nie?
like,
W sensie
the
dwóch
vocal-
założycieli, Jonathan i
at least
Chris.
the vocal minority in the community then?
I guess, that's an interesting question. I think it's a little bit to do with, like, go on.
I think part of the reason is that the way it scales at the moment in PoE1 is quite exponential. So a lot of Magic Find gear is a lot better than a little bit and a lot of damage. So the scaling we definitely want to make sure that doing low tier content with very high rarity gear is not better than doing high tier content with a bit of rarity gear.
Right. Yes, that is a
Yeah.
very important factor. Actually, yes, that's important. Right. Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yep.
Do you have anything in mind how to do that?
Honestly, so this particular area, like we will have to go and revisit those equations and do stuff, but I have to say it's not something we've like yet done the balance for. I actually then also like, because there are all sorts of things deep in the dark recesses of the like drop code that like that exist that all have to be looked at again. Like the equation for the way that Magic Find gear has diminishing returns is like weird and nobody understands it.
Co?
There's stuff going on there that I kind of need to really go back.
Mówi,
and
że
dive
w ich
into
kodzie
and,
do
like,
Magic
and, like,
Finda są takie jakieś
have a look
artefakty
at.
stare,
I'm
których
sure
nikt
Rishi
nie rozumie.
will, like, there'll be long
I
conversations
muszą
with Rishi about
totalnie
exactly all the
przegadać
stuff
to
that,
wszystko jeszcze
needs to happen here.
i
But I need to actually honestly re-understand some of the reasons why some of that stuff exists in the first place again myself to really get
O
it. But
kurde,
yeah,
co
Rory is
oni
completely
gadają?
correct that the main thing that has to be the case is it can't be better to do lower tier content with MF gear than it is to do higher tier content without it. That is I think a very good guide.
Ale bardzo ciekawy statement Jonathana. Jonathan powiedział, że nie
That
powinno
moment is kind
nigdy
of- I
być
love
bardziej
these Q&As,
opłacalne
that's awesome.
latanie niskotierowych mapek z
It
MF-em
also feels like a
niż
cheat
wysoko bez MF-a. Że wysokotierowe mapki zawsze powinny być bardziej rewarding. Zgadzam się w
Great
sumie.
endgame, and a month ago people started MFing in like tier 7 maps, and you would
So
think that they
that
would
is
use all that currency
Yes,
to
I
move
absolutely
on.
do
But
not like that. That is a mistake. in how
Mówią,
that
że nie
was.
lubią
That shouldn't
MF-owania
be
na
like
tier
that.
7
So,
mapach.
yeah, you're correct about that.
All right, awesome. I love it. So my next question, then changing topics a little bit, is about that weapon and passive tree swapping system that was previewed. So you get the ability to bind certain skills to certain weapons, and then even different passive trees to different weapons. What happens then if you do something like, say, you ignite an enemy with a tree and a weapon that's built for big ignite damage, and then you swap over to something that doesn't have that? Is the damage that you have scaled dynamically? Do you stop dealing that damage? So on, things like that?
So the only thing that doesn't snapshot, the thing that updates is your permanent effects. So if you swap, your auras will change effect. You can't turn on an aura in an aura spec and switch to a non-aura spec.
Right.
Same for minions. You can't turn on your permanent minions in one spec and then expect them to be as powerful as then your second set, which is just about having maximum spirit.
Which I believe I
versus-
might have incorrectly understood in previously. I'm not 100% sure I got that exactly right, because yeah, like in general, when you've got two weapon sets, you have two versions of the skill. But but for permanent effects, like things that are considered permanent, like minions, it does update when you change spec. But it's not only for permanent minions. Like a temporary minion will not change, because a temporary minion, well, being temporary means that you. So there's like a little tricky detail here, but effectively, while you have a weapon swap, you have two versions of every skill in your character. And
Rozmawiają o tym, jak skille snapshotują się, to znaczy aktualizują swoje efekty w momencie, w którym zmieniasz z jednego weapon setu na drugi. No i generalnie starają się, żeby nie dało się tego abuzować, wykorzystywać w jakiś absurdalny sposób.
Yeah, so if you have your totem bound to your first weapon set and you place that totem down, then switch to your second weapon set, it's still using the first weapon set's totem with all of its stats and benefits and things like that.
Cool.
So there is a lot of like, yeah, you can have a curse set up as your second spec if you've got the right sort of passive layout to make the alt passives fit with it. So you can have like big curses in one set and then take the time to weapon swap and then start doing your thing.
Yeah, so we're getting like the full power of both basically, and so like I could do a big ignite on an enemy and then swap to a second setup that has an extra curse and then curse the enemy.
Ale tak, zapowiada się ogromnie, że możesz, tak jak powiedzieli, mieć bardzo zboostowane kersy na przykład, klątwy na jednym setupie. Nakładasz ogromne klątwy, po czym jakby bijesz normalnie tym setupem zwykłym, ale te klątwy nadal są aktywne w tej super silnej wersji.
It's actually a different type of balance that we had to do before, because like there's a thing where we, like as Rory was just saying, we have to make sure that like now we have to consider like what could your other weapon set be and make sure that that those are like balanced with respect to each other, because like we wouldn't want it to be the case that like everyone just has an alternate like weapon set with curses, because you know, like it has to be that there's something like there's competitive options no matter what it is you choose to have as your alternate, even though they can be quite a different build.
Yeah, same goes for weapons. Like if you're about applying stuns with maces in one set, then using swapping to your weapon set for your second thing needs to be able to take advantage of those stuns in a significant way to make it rewarding to be using two different weapon types rather than just having two slightly different flavored maces.
For sure.
Oh, that's way better than I expected. That's really awesome to hear.
To bardzo
Sounds like a balancing nightmare, though.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Then, that's pretty much our life at this point.
Mówią, że koszmarem jest balansowanie tego, ale
why not
się.
make it, you know, 3 or 4 times harder to balance with every decision? Just whatever, you know, we'll just do it.
Why not, right?
Deal with it.
More things to nerf. Let's go.
Yeah. Sure. That's one way to look at it. Yeah.
Rise has a question about spirit. Take us away, Rise.
Wait, do I? Okay.
Yeah, you do.
Can you talk more about spirit and why you're moving away from mana reservation? Can you reserve HP with it?
O!
Really, the reason to move to spirit is so that mana can matter more. It's about making mana cost the thing that more builds can care about and less of a afterthought or something that we balance around being something you can ignore.
Yeah, I mean, the original conversation literally was, what are we going to do to make mana actually matter? And then it's like, well, what's the big problem with mana? Oh, it's the reservation system. Let's see what we can do about that. And then everything, like it was one of those really nice design moments when, you know, and it's actually interesting because I believe, Rory, you'd actually come up with the system before.
Yeah, I'd
like
it a couple of times for
Yeah. But
Rory
then we
wymyślił
sort of
system
independently
spiritu.
rediscovered it again. And then Rory was like, oh yeah, that's right. That's that same system I already came up with before now. And then when we started looking into that, it's like, okay, this actually solves like huge amounts of other problems. Like it became a thing. It's one of those awesome design moments where something happens and then you're like, oh, this fixes like these problems as well and these problems, and it turned into like a whole awesome thing. So we're really happy with that.
I mean, specifically when you're talking about reserving life, we're probably going to have a support gem that lowers the spirit cost of something slightly, but makes it reserve some life as well. So you've
Czyli
got that
nadal
sort of
będzie można w
things
jakiś
you can
sposób
do with it.
rezerwować życie prawdopodobnie.
We're going to have to come up with a bunch of cool
Spoko.
supports
Right.
that let you interact with
Ale nie
spirit
manę,
costs
I
and
guess.
spirit mechanics in ways that feel impactful.
There's something technically preventing reservation being a thing. We just have to be really like of life and mana, that is, but we just have to be really careful that we don't accidentally make it again so that the most useful thing to do is that again, if you know what I mean. Like we want to make sure that you never get back into a position where everyone is reserving all their resources. Like it has to be that like that is not the default thing. Like that is a niche thing to do, because the normal thing to do is use your spirit bar. So that's just important. But there's nothing like we may revisit things. I mean, like you can. The mechanic is there for use on things like uniques or maybe support gems in some cases, or just certain other things. We just need to be careful with it.
All right.
You can get.
Go ahead.
It's like flat amounts of spirits, the spirit that you can get from quests and even killing
Yes, there
bosses,
is
right?
other sources, so it's on the tree as well. And yep, there's a couple of quests that give you a little bit, and
Amulet as well.
and yeah, and then things. Yes, amulet, exactly. There was things like that. So there's places you can get it, and of course the big one being.
Ciekawi
the,
mnie,
the
ile
scepter,
oczekują, że gracze
for
będą
the kind of
przeciętnie
menu
grali
focus
aurę na
build is what
postać.
you'll
Czy to
typically
będzie
use.
2-3 pewnie? Nadal?
Nugi has a question about defenses next. Take us away, Nugi.
Mhm.
Of course I do.
Gotta build them.
Well, so you've been nerfing flasks and other things to that basically. Actually, let me just read the question. After the nerfs, the flask and the rebalance to armor evasion,
Śmieją się z
removal of
Lugiela.
dodge, multiple block nerfs. It seems that at an early stage, nowadays you demand either the use of determination or grace, either determination or grace or both, and you kind of have to have a very high health pool or a spell suppression to not just get flat out one shot, which leaves the players in kind of an awkward situation where you either have these things or you just get run over quite fast when you're near sort of the endgame yellow-red maps. Let's see here. So how do you feel about these changes to this? And are we going to see a similar thing in PoE 2?
Right. So I don't want to comment on the PoE 1 balance particularly, because it is not my
Right.
expertise. Like Mark, if Mark
Right.
was here, he'd have a whole rant about that. However, what I will talk about is philosophy of a few things in PoE 2 with regard to this. So number one is, it is not the case in PoE 2 that I would want every character to be running auras, right? Like that should not be the case. And another thing actually around this is that in PoE 2, we're getting a little bit more strict again with the fact that gear is supposed to be adding flat things, and the tree is supposed to be more multiplicative.
O,
Something like an aura also should be more multiplicative in general as well, I would hope, although we do need to discuss the specifics of those particular auras, which
ciekawe.
means that like something like determination and grace should not just be your one-stop shop to solve your defense problems. Like it should be that the items should matter a lot, and then you multiply what your items are doing with other sources, ideally.
Yeah, there's almost no way to get armor
Są,
or
że-
evasion flat values outside of your gear pieces. You're not.
Oh.
There's almost nothing that
Okay.
you can just take to be like, I can't afford the gear. I'm using.
Podoba
this,
mi się
so
to.
I'll use just a random.
Są
aura or
więcej
any
flat
mechanic
statów
really
na itemach
outside of
niż
gear.
obecnie,
But in general,
a
your
więcej
tree should be
300% na
multiplicative.
drzewku i spelach i aurach.
There was actually, I had a whole rant about this that I gave to the whole company at some point in recent times. I'm just trying to remember the specifics of now. But we were talking about there was kind of a concept that we discovered about like flat things are like I had a better word for this, but a sort of despecializing in a way, because when you add a flat thing to something like everyone gets closer to being the same when you add flat values on something. And multiplicative things are specializing because they mean that everyone, like the person who is already better gets even better than that. So we have to decide, like, from what sources do we want things to be specializing, and from what sources do we want things to be despecializing. And the tree should be a specializing like thing. It should, like, because the whole idea with the tree is that you're picking the things that are going to synergize well with what you're doing, right? Like it's supposed to be an amplifying force to specialize your character in a certain way. Whereas the items on your character can be despecializing. Like you can use items to overcome issues that you have otherwise, but also you're just picking what you're like. But like in both cases, you're picking like what you want to do with your build. But it's like you actually want them to have different roles to make them feel like different things. And then the question becomes support gems. Should they be a specializing or despecializing element of your build? And we came to the understanding that they should actually be something that is despecializing, I believe is where we actually ended up, because it's like the idea is that like you can use a support gem to overcome like to change what a skill, like if we want a support gem to change what a skill does, if they were a specializing thing, it would mean that, okay, you like that would actually mean that you want to use a support gem, the same support gem with a given skill all the time, right? Because basically this would it would just be for a given support gem that this thing is best with that skill. So therefore, like there's no real decisions at that point. It's just like, oh, I'm using this fireball. The best thing that goes with the fireball is this thing here because it has the
żeby
most effect on
support
it.
gemy
Whereas
były
if they're
uniwersalne
despecializing, they
mocno, I
actually
guess.
mean that you
Żeby
actually have choices there. So that
pasowały
was a
do bardzo dużej
non-obvious
ilości
answer
skilli.
for that one. It's actually opposite of what you might initially think when
Dobór
you
support
first
gemów
see
nie
it.
był jednoznaczny.
But this was a new way of thinking actually about things that I think that we sort of had, like on some level we understood this intuitively, especially with the tree and the way that items were, but it was not an explicit understanding that we had until we actually sort of broke it down a little bit there. And so that understanding kind of came to sort of guide the philosophy there. And seems like it's getting way off the topic that we originally had here, but it does sort of matter a little bit because when you're looking at a skill, a skill should be I think should be more of a specializing thing, which is why something like an aura then would imply that it should be multiplicative rather than flat. So that's like a whole long-winded answer about about how we get there. But what that means is, yes, grace determination should probably be multiplicative. Like I'm interested to know whether or not you think that sort of logic there holds up.
Może
over
usuną
time, but
Flat
yeah, that's
Armor
the,
i Evasion z Grace
This
Determination
does mean something
niedługo.
like the Ignite support should be about making a skill that is bad at igniting and better at igniting, rather than just further capping your Ignite chance.
Exactly, because it's a way to use a skill in a new way you weren't using it before.
Right.
Whereas the tree is like I'm specializing in Ignite with what I'm doing. I need to multiply the value of my ignites.
I say the same for Spirit Reservations, where they are multiplying something. You've already focused on shocks, so using Herald of Thunder on your weapon will further take advantage of those shocks.
Right. Yep. All right.
I feel like that plays really well into one of my favorite things about PoE 2, which is removing all the life from the passive tree. I feel like changes like this.
O, właśnie, zapomniemy o tym.
Such a good idea.
To tak, to jedna z moich ulubionych rzeczy, co powiedzieli o drzewku w PoE2, że nie będzie życia na drzewku.
Correct.
Bo każdy musiał brać życie, więc stwierdzili, że to jest chujowa decyzja w takim razie. Nie będzie życia na drzewku.
An easier way to then specialize either into, say, let's say, on this playthrough I want to be evasion stacking, on this one I want to be block or armor, like where
Ja się zgadzam z Ryzem.
right now
Mega
it seems
dobra
very
decyzja.
difficult to go, at least from an early stage, to say I want to just go block, unless you're like Necromancer that has like a cheap way of getting there. It very much is, you have your armor evasion, or would you rather have like certain classes would specialize, or should there be a broader range that you can choose from the start?
The block is one of those. I mean, because the idea with block is like that is a multiplicative defense that you get if you're willing to give up damage by sacrificing one of your hands. So the reason why block is kind of independent of those is because it's intended to be multiplicative with whatever else you're doing, so that can always be the decision of, am I using my right, left, well, I guess whatever hand for defense, or am I using it for more offense? So that's kind of like where that ends up. So I don't know that I don't think block is early game should be your primary defense, because it is the multiplicative thing on top of whatever your primary defense is. Yeah.
Z supresem? Nie wiadomo, ale wolałbym, żeby nie było, szczerze.
Yeah, I guess it sort of is. I mean, like in all cases, whatever is on your offhand is going to be being more defensive.
Right.
Well, no, I shouldn't say that. What I should say is, in all cases, you can choose to use your offhand as defense or offense, right? So whatever class you are, there's options in your offhand that are going to cause that to be the case. So block is one of those, but they have to be multiplicative with what you're doing in order to make that choice meaningful. So yeah.
How does Energy Shield factor into this? Because you've removed life from the tree, but Energy Shield is a defense, but it kind of acts more like life than the other defenses.
Yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it? Where are we at with that one, Rory?
It's definitely a thing of like how you recover Energy Shield is a significantly more controlled thing where you're not expecting passive energy shield regen all the time. It's not like life where you can just expect to get constant amounts of it back. It's a barrier and a buffer that is not reliable 100% of the time, without serious shenanigans on your character. But there's always serious shenanigans available.
But do we have flat energy shield on the tree? No, I didn't think so. Yes, I thought it was multiplicative, which it should be under that philosophy. Yes, we don't have flat, so yeah, multiplicative there.
Nie ma żadnego flat
We expect
testa na drzewku.
ES might be a bit more controlled than it is currently, because I'd say in PoE 1 right now, it's pretty good to solve energy shield recovery through various means, leech and wicked ward and things like that.
I mean, chaos inoculation is definitely a source of endless discussion because of how it implies that it should be your one-stop shop for defense, but
Cały czas rozmawiają o
Yeah,
false
more
ejaculation.
discussions to
Under
come on that.
discussion.
Tak się pływa.
Got it.
Okay. Czyli jeszcze tego
So
nie
following on
rozkminił.
from the topic of defenses then is, how do you feel about time to death? From effective signal to actual death. Is this something that will be changing substantially from PoE 1 to PoE 2?
So I guess there's a few elements of this to talk about. So the first one is obviously we want to make sure that signaling attacks should be always good, right? Like there have been failures in PoE 1 of that for sure. We want to improve that. We've kind of talked about that a bunch of times. The time to death in PoE 1 is probably too short, but I want to stress the fact that we're not going overboard with changing it. Like what I'm saying is we can multiply the time to death by 5 and go from 500 milliseconds to 2.5 seconds, and that's still fine. You know what I mean? Like it's a different situation. Like what we aren't going to be is a game where you have a big health pool and then someone grinds you down over 30 seconds. You know what I mean? Like recovery, like we are still a game where your life changes.
Okej, to ciekawe. Mówi, że gracze zginą zbyt szybko w PoE1, ale też nie chcą tego zbyt bardzo spowalniać w PoE2. I że na przykład jeśli obecnie w PoE1 giniesz w pół sekundy, to może w PoE2 będziesz ginął w 2,5 sekundy. Ale też nie będzie to taki grind, że mobek cię bije z pół godziny jak w World of Warcraft.
Being hit by a heavy hit from a boss is 1 or 2 seconds, if not significantly more, of risky time.
Because the issue is that if it's like 5 milliseconds, like it can be right now, then there's literally no way to kill your player except by one shot, which isn't good. So it needs to be higher, but I wouldn't want people to think that that's going to be a long time. Like it is going to be short amounts of time, just not like literally milliseconds, like it can be at the moment. You know, like it should be. Yeah, there should be fast changes, but yeah. Hopefully that covers what you were kind of asking about.
Yeah,
Miejsca
it
będzie
seems like,
prościej
and it
mimo
makes sense
PoE1.
with things like the flask changes and stuff like that, restricting availability of healing a little bit more, and what we've seen from the combat that you would be heading in that direction, where
Right.
there's a little bit more time for you to capitalize on the fact that someone's taken some damage.
Yes,
Yeah.
but not too long.
Yeah, I get it. We're talking about the difference from instant in current PoE to a tenth of a second, which is a long time in the concept of an action RPG when you're
Right.
operating on reflex and stuff.
For sure,
I get it. Yeah. Rise has a question on gearing through the vendors.
To what extent will you be able to gear through the vendors during the DM and Gazi interview? It seemed like gold will be a large part of itemization, especially in the end game with the new crafting changes and whatnot.
I would think to say that it's a large part is not really correct. Like it is a part, right? Like you should want to go to vendors and look at them. But I wouldn't say that. I would not imagine that I don't think the primary source of the items in your character is going to be vendors. Like, absolutely not. It's just something that, honestly, the main thing I think in early games it's going to help a lot with regard to improving, filling up all the holes in your character. And then at end game you've got gambling as well, which is another thing you can do, which can be a thing. But once again, I think to say a large part would probably be overestimating the effect.
You'll get some good items from gambling at some point, but you're not being geared up by gold.
Right.
No, gold raczej game'owy się wydaje.
One of the concerns from that interview, and I was very excited to talk about things that I look forward to in PoE 2, but I wouldn't be myself if I wouldn't talk about one of the bigger concerns overall. And so far, I've heard really, really good things that I really, really like. But one of the big problems was the crafting and potentially the vendors, the gambling, because from the looks of it, we are going to be picking up a lot more bases and then attempting to use something like a Chaos Orb to remove something and add
Correct, you are.
something. So wouldn't
think-
gambling play into that pretty significantly? And like
I
having
mean,
to
it
pick
can
up a lot
definitely
of
come in.
items.
It can definitely come in. I think so. I think the fear you're talking about is like, oh, like people look at the like drifts of items on the ground in PoE 1 and then they're like, oh, if I had to pick all these up and look at them, then that would be bad. But I think
Right.
that like the context of that is like I don't think you should have that fear. Like, yes, I want people picking up and identifying items, but it's not going to be the case that you're picking up like, you know, like hundreds of items per map and being like, I have to look at all of these every time, right? That is absolutely not going to be the case. Like, there are more item system changes we have to discuss that I think will illuminate this a lot in the future. But suffice to say, yes, it is an explicit goal to get items on the ground to matter a lot, right? That we want
Realnie
the items
chcą,
on the ground to
żebyśmy
matter a lot
girowali się
more.
podnosząc
100% we do.
przedmioty z podłogi i chcą
But
czynić
don't
to dużo
necessarily
bardziej
take that to
ekscytujące
mean
niż PoE1.
that you're going to be spending your day identifying rares like and like after every map for like a freaking half an hour, right? Like it's absolutely not going to be the case of that. So I guess all I can say about that is don't worry. Like when we talk more about the way that item drops will work in PoE2, I think that will become more clear. And there are big changes there, like quite like changes that I think like when I first pitched them to Chris, his first reaction was, what the hell, you know what I mean? Like, and then it, like when I sold him on, when I explained the reasoning, he's like, oh yeah, actually that's awesome, you know what I mean? Like,
Ale
that's
zajebiste. Fajnie, że
thing
Jonathan
that's,
już drugi
like,
raz
yeah,
w tym
there's stuff
wywiadzie
there. So we'll talk about that in the future.
mówi,
but
że ma
it's
taki
quite different.
jakieś pitche robi do Chrisa, że idzie do Krzysztofa i mówi,
Fair
widzisz
enough.
Krzysztof,
And the
słuchaj,
thing with
mamy
that,
ten pomysł.
as well as okay, so like
Krzysztof mówi,
it's-
co do
it's
kurwy?
funny as well because when
Jonathan
I talk
tłumaczy
about
i
major changes here,
Krzysztof
like
mówi, a faktycznie, dobry pomysł.
to a player who doesn't understand PoE, it'll probably seem like the stupidest things, but it's like internally they matter a lot and like they'll change the feel of the game quite a lot. So it does matter a lot to get this exactly right.
Yeah, for sure. Because
Tak,
that
dumę z
was
ciebie, Dagerą.
absolutely. I looked at it very much from the PoE1 perspective,
Yeah,
and
for sure,
I'm not gonna
for
lie, I
sure.
was pretty concerned, especially in the case of like power creep,
Mhm.
that you know you used to pick up like one of something, and that felt okay. But now that you're picking up 1,000 of that one of something, and you're having to move it. So,
But that comes back to, by the way, the thing before about the 1000x thing. Like the reason why we even have that as a guiding star is because we want to make item rarity be able to improve your drops by 1,000 times without relying on quantity.
That's hard.
And that is hard, but that is what we have to do to be able to like. That's what I'm saying. Like that's what. Like, so this is where the 1000x. So the conversation that even came up in the office. I mean, like when we were discussing this and why that even became a thing was because like okay, like what is the maximum amount we want players to be able to scale their drops by, right? And then once we've got that number, how do we make it so you can do that with only rarity alone and not quantity?
No.
So that
Smart loot,
you
tak
don't end
zwany.
up with the drifts of items on the ground. So that is the challenge. That is the thing the drop system has to be able to solve. And that is the reason why a number like 1,000 times needs to exist so that we can work out what needs to happen internally.
Czyli
to be able to
spodziewam
make
się
that happen.
tierowania
So
baz
that's
dużo
kind of where
bardziej
that comes from. So I guess
skomplikowanego
that might have been a bit less.
i rarity
There
na
might have been
przykład
less context to that
podnoszące
number when I originally gave it.
częstotliwość
This is
dropu
probably a better
rzadkich
explanation
baz
of why that exists.
i ewentualnie
There's also
podnoszenie tierów na nich. No nie wiem, żeby to działało, to musi działać na wielu płaszczyznach, mam wrażenie.
Far less of a focus on because it also disturbs the like combat composition of packs and things like that. Where it's like the fight is designed like each of those fights is sort of a pretty tight fight. And
Right.
if suddenly there's 5 times as many casters doing the freezing thing on you, then you're not going to have a good time.
Right. So I mean, not which isn't to say there won't be any sources of pack size. There will need to be some, but it probably shouldn't get quite so out of control in some ways. But the thing is, you do want to feel like there's some like oh, this map is crazy. There's a bunch of shit in it. You need that too, but like there's still, but it can be a bit of off the wall right now.
With the
So we need to be
rarity,
careful.
with the rarity thing, sorry, it almost sounds like you're pushing towards some sort of like rarity makes the quality of rares better or something like that.
Well, I mean, yeah, well, we can talk more about that later. But I mean, there's
We've said too much.
we're probably saying too much already. So like we'll
I'm
I
ready
mean,
for it.
Powiedzieli już
and
zbyt
the
dużo.
reason I don't want to talk too much about it is just because like there are a lot of specifics around this that we'll need that we need to get tested and working out correctly. Like it isn't done enough to be able to really talk about.
Yep.
But
excited.
yeah, there's stuff to do there for sure.
My imagination's running away.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Can't stop-
I
can't
remember
stop me.
when Chris talked about that a lot. Like Chris used to talk about the smart systems, but not just. It kind of got implemented. It felt like for currency drops, where you get less of like the smaller currencies, and then whenever you do drop them, it's a stack, or like you get the better ones. And I think a lot of PoE1 players were expecting that eventually, sooner or later, it's going to happen for loot and even unique items, and you're going to have that effect of what was at the time called smart loot, which I don't know if it's still the case. So seeing that for
Chris,
PoE2 would be
the
great.
the thing that is called smart drops, which from back in the D3 days, is something we very much don't want to do, which was tailoring the gear that drops to the character you're playing.
Right.
And that we do not like.
Yeah.
That I
Nigdy nie
think
chcą
might,
dropu
you
jak w
might be thinking
Diablo
of times
3,
when Chris
który
was talking about that stuff. And yeah,
pasowałby do twojej
we
postaci.
don't want to we will never resort to that. Like we feel like it's important to have the feeling of like I found an item, but it's for someone else, and I'm going to trade it now, and like that being a part of the game being important. So like we will never
mean,
do that.
especially-
But what is important, yeah, is just making it effectively so that the stuff that drops is more valuable without it requiring us to multiply the number of things on the ground by 100 times.
Yep.
So yeah.
I mean, gold is kind of a way of doing the smart drops where you're then buying the item slots that you would want.
Yeah, so you can actually move a little bit of the way to do that, just because then you buy the stuff that's good for your character. But yeah, that's not the majority of the not the big focus, but yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I always think about like PoE players would abuse this and it would make it super unfun, where everybody would play like Pathfinder because Pathfinder gets the most valued drops.
Yeah,
and now-
maybe, yeah, exactly.
Oh no. No, man.
Yeah.
Noogie has a good follow-up about crafting tools in Path of Exile 2.
Well, let me actually flip the question, or just so you initially, for those who can remember, you introduced the orb that was called the Eternal Orb, and then you removed it, and now you reintroduced Hinakora's Lock, which is essentially like the same thing. So I was thinking, are there anything that you kind of regret with the PoE crafting system, or that you want changed in PoE 2?
Czego żałują
and
w
why?
crafting systemie PoE1?
With the exception of Harvest. Sorry.
Yeah,
So
let's
I
not
guess,
talk.
like,
I'm
you
mainly
gonna
talking
include it?
about like
I get-
currency drops that you use to craft with.
Well,
And, like, the philosophy behind that.
there's a couple of things we could talk about here, because one of the big ones, which we've already talked about how we're changing, is Chaos Orb, and I think and Scouring. So like, it's sort of amazing the degree to which those two items affected the way the game is, and honestly, the way the drops on the ground are, and all of that stuff like that. Like it took a long time for us to understand the fact that when an item can change completely in one currency item, it results in the only thing mattering about an item on the ground being the base type. And that's bad.
Zgadzam się. Jeśli
And
nie
so
jesteś w
that
stanie
is
tak
like
łatwo
a
przelodować
very
itemu, to przedmiot ma
important,
większe identity.
Like,
tak
very important thing. So I absolutely regret
ma osobowość.
how that was, but I don't think that there's a way we could have even understood that where we were back when we designed that originally. So it's kind of like, it's hard to say that I regret it exactly, because that would imply like, oh, I just kind of screwed up and didn't have foresight. Like it really is, like it took a lot of, I guess, like design maturity to get to the point of understanding that. Yeah, I mean, like, when I look at something like Eternal, I don't think I regret Eternal at all either. I mean, I'm trying to think back to why it is we even removed it in the first place. Like, do you remember? It's like,
I think it was just another way of people getting perfect items more reliably, and we're
Yeah.
like, there's already a lot of ways to
but like, I mean,
edge towards that.
Hinakora's Lock is already like does bring that back, right? I mean, but the UXs of Hinakora's
It
Lock
does.
is better. But I mean, it's like, I don't know. I'd have to go back into the archives and work out what exactly was going through our heads at the time. But like, I mean, sure, like there's those, right? Those base ones matter a lot.
Też się
And
martwi
then
o
when
te
you look at
potki, Dario.
like, all the other crafting systems in PoE, I mean, on an individual basis, there are individual mistakes, sure, like where things like were too powerful or whatever. But I don't know that they quite have the same level of like importance that something like Chaos Orb and Scouring have in terms of affecting the whole game and the way the whole drops. So, like, I don't think that like anything that we've done in any of those other crafting systems really quite broke the drop system to the extent that those orbs did. So
I do think
yeah.
we're now much more careful not to make sure that a league's currency or league special reward is not strictly better than a chaos orb. Like in every case, you would rather use this than a chaos orb to do
Right.
what chaos orb was intended to do.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
at least not without some severe restrictions
Right.
to it.
So you're saying you want to keep like the base currencies more relevant and the others to be more of a alternative rather than a replacement?
I don't know that that's the motivation. It really comes
Okay.
down to not breaking the drop system. That's like the key
Okay.
thing. And yes, it's nice if that is a nice thing to make sure of as well, because it's a nice secondary goal. But it really is the just don't break the drops, right? Like make it still fun to find items is like really important. So yeah, I think that's kind of really the key element.
Mówię, że kluczowym elementem mimo wszystko nadal będzie
And
to,
do
żeby dropy były
you
fajne do znajdowania. Fajniejsze niż
do
obecnie.
you intend items to become 100% perfect again in PoE 2?
I mean, that should be hard, of course, but it will be able to happen. I mean, yeah, like at some level, like what's the point of the ability for something to exist if it never exists? Like it
I
should just be
mean-
very rare and hard, right? You know, like I
Sure,
don't. Think,
but
I
you
do
could
not-
intend for something to be, say, like you get to the 99 percentile, but you're never really reaching like the perfect, like where
Right, I see what you
everything
mean.
locks
Sure, I mean, you
into
always
the-
want something to strive for, I guess, is the thing there. I mean,
Yeah.
it's honestly like
I mean, it'll be mathematically near impossible.
yes, it's mathematically
But it'll
never at some
happen.
point, but it'll
Right.
happen eventually. But you know, like the
Okay.
thing.
Okay.
But certainly, when you want there to be stuff to strive for, right? You absolutely want that. And I
Yeah.
mean, like there should be rares that you can strive for. You know, like like the most amazing rare should be a thing that is hard to get. So you know, yeah, like there's stuff like that. The other thing as well. Well, no, actually, you know, I'm not going to go into that because that's more other stuff that I probably shouldn't talk about yet. But yeah,
It is also going to be that, like, if you have an item that's 95% of the way there, it should be that you keep working on that item rather than, like, actually, let's just start from scratch because I've got a higher chance to, like, bring it from a base
Okay.
type back up to that point.
that can be dependent a little bit, I think, on the situation. That's more iffy of a philosophy, I think. But yeah, there's going to be a lot more to talk about items later for sure.
In current state of Path of Exile, the best items can't really drop because of the nature of things like influence modifiers and stuff like that that are only available through crafting. Is that something you'd be shifting away from with PoE 2, I imagine?
I don't know that I've got a really like a fully thought through answer for that one.
I mean, there's just a lot of design space and league mechanics and
Yeah,
game rewards that only really works if you then add it onto an item you've already got or something
Yeah.
like that. So it's hard to say, nah, that'll never happen.
I mean, you the implication there is that the perfect item even exists in the sense that, like, I mean, clearly, I mean, items only are perfect in the sense of perfect for a given build, right? Like, there should be multiple axes of what can make a perfect item, and so, like, ideally, all of those influence mechanics and things are sort of changing the builds you can do, like making it so a different thing exists. Like all that. I guess what you're asking though there is like, should like influence mechanics should they be more important from the ground than from crafting? I don't know quite the answer to that, but I guess we'll have to see when we get there.
From a different angle, I guess the drops that I enjoy the most these days are things like delve modifiers dropping and temple modifiers and fractured items
się zgadzam.
that have like, I look at one of those items and I say, oh, this is a special item that I can do
Że
something
znajdujesz
with now.
jakieś świetne drop-only
Yes.
sufiksy w
Being able
delwie,
to say
czy
this is a thing I
łalwy.
can do something with is absolutely an explicit goal of the new stuff, right?
Możesz je
Like
frakczerować.
and then that once again, that's the
To jest
chaos orb
super.
change right there. Is like, here is an item that I could modify, as
Yeah.
opposed to this is a base type I throw away and I could just use any, I could just, you know, scour alch or chaos or whatever it is that you're doing to just throws away everything about it. So yes, the key thing is basically when you look at an item, it should be what could this turn into, you know, like what
Podoba mi się to, o
steps
czym
can I
mówią.
take to make this awesome is the primary thing you should be thinking about.
I chcą, żebyś znajdował w ten sposób
awesome.
fajne
Or
itemy
it's just not good enough. Like there's not
i
enough
się
there
z
to
nimi
be
bawił,
good,
a
you
nie
know,
craftował wszystko od zera od białego itema.
All right. Changing topic a little bit. I haven't really felt like I've heard much about transfigured gems and Vile skills in Path of Exile 2. Are they like alternate types of skills like that going to be a thing?
I mean, it's absolutely been a thing during skill development that be like, oh, what if it did this completely different thing? And we're like, yeah, we're going to need to make a transfigured gem for that at some point.
So we'll need to work out exactly what the system for gaining them is and all that sort of stuff like that. But but actually Vile skills and in particular work way better in a PoE 2 skill context than they did in PoE 1 because
Będą wal skille w
they'd
PoE
just
2
be- they would just
confirmed.
be different gems. They wouldn't be they wouldn't be so actually probably the Val thing would probably be more like how transfigured gems are, where it's like there's a way to turn a gem into a Val skill, and then presumably because it can be a 6-link now, it actually makes more, and because you've got more skill slots that can be 6 links in particular, like the idea of a skill I use occasionally and have to charge up is way more relevant in PoE 2 than it would be in PoE 1. So like, I mean, we'll have to look at the exact stuff around that, but I think that the system overall, like the idea of that stuff, works way better now than it would have in the past.
I always feel like Val skills have been a little bit underexplored, perhaps, and it does seem like there's a lot of room there in PoE 2.
Agree, and I think it's hard just due to the nature of the way that that the PoE 1 skill system is, and I think it can be a lot better in PoE.
I mówi, że wal skille będą dużo lepsze.
Rise
Dużo
has a quality
ciekawszym
of life
systemem
question
w
for
PoE
us.
2.
Love you, Rise.
I kind of want to follow up though first on
do.
on transfigured gems. Do you feel like it was a success? From my perspective, it's like the greatest change ever to PoE. I know that it probably took quite a lot of effort, but are you guys happy with the outcome and how the players received it?
Also a fan.
It is a success, and I think that it's nice to have a venue to just like, what if a skill just did some totally random other thing to explore? Like it's sort of easier to like explore a different balance option and a transfigured version of a gem than it is to modify the original gem. And that's kind of a nice element that we can just kind of do now. Like, and I think that just makes it easier. Like, it just sort of uncuffs you a little bit with regard to like being able to just design some different things. So I think that is very good. And we're gonna continue to make more transfigured gems for each expansion.
W każdej lidze będzie więcej transfigurowanych gemów teraz.
Like, they're relatively easy to develop, so like there's really no reason not to like throw stuff like that in. So
Login.
I think we'll do more of them for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely trickier in PoE 2 where each of the skills are far more like handcrafted and all this stuff going on, but that's too cool not to do.
No, we'll definitely be doing some stuff like that.
Interesting, like PoE 2's combat is much more like combo oriented, right?
Mhm.
So that is
Sure.
is that why?
No,
Yeah.
Karusel.
It's, I mean, definitely plenty of opportunities of like, this has just changed the skills element, and that changes a lot about it because of all the factors involved in each skill. Cool.
I feel like it takes the reins off you guys a little bit too, because if a transfigured gem is a dud, no one really cares. But if like a core skill is a dud, everybody cares. Like, it's disappointing.
I mean, the like Mark was just saying, he's like, oh yeah, I'll just be ruthless. We'll just like cut 10 of them if we don't like what they're doing. Put 20 more in, like, you know, this kind of thing. Like, it's just, that just like whatever. You can just go ham with it. So yeah, that's all good. Yeah.
All right, jump back to you.
Yeah, okay, I'm still not asking my question. This is a different question then when it comes to...
All right,
because
man, come
Rory's
on.
here and Rory knows everything. So I have been getting this a lot about PoE 2. Will people still be able to play one-button builds?
O,
That's
dobre
been happening
pytanie.
a lot. It seems like everything's combining, but people are pretty concerned about
Czy
will
będą
that still be a possibility?
one-button buildy w PoE 2.
I can't see a way that it would end up being more efficient than using your skills in a
Right.
clever way.
Okay.
But laziness is
I'm
increasing.
sure there will be ways to do that, but I wouldn't say it's a goal of ours to preserve. But also, I'm like, hey, all of these like automation gems are cool. We should have a bunch more of those and things like that. And so like it kind of ends up just being that like the nature of the tools we give players will just kind of mean that will probably be possible. But I should hope it isn't more efficient than actually like doing more than that.
And yeah, we've got cast on dodge roll. You can dodge a roll around
Cast on
triggering
dodge
your
roll,
spells
yes.
to do stuff, but you could be using that spirit for something else.
you
You could be
Cast on
using more-
dodge.
I remember there was
Będzie.
Wait, that's a real thing? You're not joking?
Oh yeah, it was brought.
Yes.
Someone
Yeah,
brought
we're
it up
doing
at
custom dodge roll.
ExileCon, and
Yeah,
we
yeah.
were just like, oh yeah, let's implement it.
Yeah, custom
Ale
dodge roll thing.
zajebiste. Custom
But I
dodge
remember there was
roll
a
będzie.
conversation between Mark and one of the other designers. I don't remember which one it was now, where they were like, "Oh, I just want to be able to have a one-button build," and we were kind of like, "Okay," so like, and he's like, they were like, "Oh, I just want to use this skill," like they were saying, and we're like, "Okay, but what if you just but then you could get a bit more damage if you did this. And they were like, oh, well, I guess I could use that as well. You know, like, yeah, sure, I'll add that. So it'll be this, but then I'll just use this occasionally. And then I'm like, oh yeah, but then you could use this skill. It would like combo this and like would increase your damage again. Like, oh yeah, okay, so you're right. I should add this one as well. And you know, and pretty soon we had like 5 or 6 skills they were using, and it's like they talk themselves into having more. So I mean, if you present like things that will improve people's builds to them one at a time, they'll tend to want to add them, and then pretty soon they're not using one button build anymore. So you know, like yeah, it changes.
Ooh.
Yeah, I my hope is that you won't want to be a one button build because you'll feel enticed by the cool things you could be doing. So
Czyli mówią, że są otwarci na one button buildy, ale chcą, żeby opcje związane z klikaniem były na tyle interesujące i ciekawe, żeby ludzie chcieli wciskać więcej guzików.
Like, okay, the right combo here to do is like play it like a concerto piano where you've got 15 different keys you need to use in the right sequence of optimum damage. Like, that's not going to be fun. It's
Right.
going to be like using the skill when you see the situation has come up
Right.
to use the skill and thinking about when to use it.
The more interesting question to me is how good will the 0 button builds be? Like that's the question that I have. We still have to play around with that, I guess.
I'm formulating a bonus question here, so bear with me. So I'm mostly pretty excited about the idea of these various situational skills and combos and things like that. But Path of Exile 1 has given us a very good example of ways in which it can become unfun, and that is totems on melee builds. It feeling like a mandatory and annoying thing to use for various reasons, like them dying and their placement and stuff like that. I think is an example of that kind of like bad comboing that makes it less fun but feels mandatory. Have you thought about that, discussed that, and how you might be avoiding that with PoE 2's design?
Definitely avoiding stuff that is like, this is just a buff that you want to effectively keep up all the time, and sometimes it's annoying to keep up all the time, but it's just there all the time, is something we're trying to avoid as much as possible, especially because you can then weapon swap to like apply the buff and then go back. It becomes a chore. Much more focus on the combo skills being like, and now they're open, so I'm going to do a 10 times damage freezing spell on them that will just nuke them.
Melee totems, partly, I think, like, because melee's not really that great in PoE 1, and so it's kind of like melee totems are part of the kind of like attempt to make that better, like at some point in the past, and so like I certainly will want PoE 2 to have melee totems as well, but the way they work. I mean, what makes them so annoying, right? Like, what is it? What is really at the core
That's
of what
the
makes them
question, right?
annoying?
Like,
I think this is the
what's your take
I
on
mean,
that?
the main thing that it's got a huge damage buff, right? And you
Yep.
might as well have that
mandatory.
huge damage
that
Yeah.
that is
which is
definitely
almost
will
certainly
need-
gone.
That will definitely need to go, right? There should be no reason why that should give you a damage buff like that. In
Yeah,
fact,
like-
why was that even done in the first place?
I feel like them doing damage should
Mam
be the
nadzieję, że
damage buff,
nerfią
right?
totemy
Like,
w
of
takim
course,
razie
of
po
course. Like, well,
jeden.
yeah, why not? Why wouldn't it be, right?
Będzie swoje
So
mele
why was that
totemy.
damage buff even added?
Bo
Why-
sami
why is that?
stwierdzili, że to
Holy,
bez
just 'cause
sensu, że
everything we gave melee was some sort of buff to their thing if it wasn't.
But it
already.
was just kind of like an awkward ancient band-aid, I guess, at
I
this
don't
point.
remember why that would have even been added.
obecnie nie da się grać w
Honestly, to
mele
make them
buildem bez
different from
totemów.
other totems. Just
Jak nie grasz
done the
totemów na
right
mele
way.
buildzie, to trolujesz.
But they,
I
did they
mówią,
have
że
that
w
when they
sumie
were added?
chujowo, że to tak działa.
Yeah, yeah.
Przyznają to
Oh,
otwarcie.
jeez.
The buff has been buffed.
Może to zmienią niedługo.
The thing is, I feel I feel like maybe I'll even suggest this to Mark, but it's like we probably should just remove that and like
Oh!
make it better,
I
right?
think we already
Powiedział,
have
że-
them, the plans. for
Oh, and
those
yeah,
skills,
sure.
Sobie to
But what I
powinno
meant
wywalić.
was, and even in PoE 1, maybe I don't know. Like
not
either way though, like that's
Right,
not
right.
not up to me. That's a Mark question.
I
But
think that's
but go on.
I think that's not why they're like considered bad though. That's
But
the
no, I agree.
aggravating
The other
factor,
element is the having to recast them all the time, right? That's your
Yeah.
concern.
for sure.
Which, I mean, it'll be an optional playstyle if you want to invest in melee totems and focus on that stuff.
Yeah.
And probably also you're investing in stuff that makes it far more convenient to
But
keep them up.
Then the question
Exactly.
I have is, why is it not unfun to recast your spell totems?
Why is it? Wait, what?
Because the spell totems are doing your damage. Like they're the main thing you want to
As
do.
opposed to
right?
the melee totems,
As
which
opposed
are
to
doing
spell
damage,
totems.
right? So what you're saying is
Yes.
that it might be fine to recast the spell, the melee totems if they were actually doing damage to the monsters, as opposed to
Yeah,
buffing
if you're
you.
doing a totem
As
build.
opposed, yeah, right. So no,
Yeah.
it really comes always back to the fact that they give you a damage boost, which makes them mandatory and makes it feel frustrating because you need to keep the damage boost up and blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it all stems from that decision, I think. So I suspect, like, well, I have to admit, we haven't like prototyped melee totems in PoE 2 again yet. Like, that's not a thing we've yet done. So therefore, we haven't kind of then what that means is that we haven't like, unless you, am I wrong about that, Rory? Did we do it already?
It's technically functional, but we haven't played with it.
Well, sure. We haven't like had a whole like thing where we like, okay, let's get this in the right place kind of moment, like yet, if you know what I mean. So what that means is
na
that like
pewno
it's
nie
hard to be
będą
announced
tak
this
działały
week, but I
totemy.
absolutely
Tyle
believe
powiedzieli.
that yeah, it's going to be that damage bonus that's the primary part of why they suck. So
Yeah.
that can be improved in that way.
I think like even zooming out a little bit, it kind of extends to other things that are like a mandatory damage buff that have an inconsistent uptime.
Yeah,
Like because that's they're dying randomly to you as the player, and that's similar to like with a totems.
No, I agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with that for sure.
Oh, that's really good to hear.
Okay.
Looking forward to seeing how you address that in the future. That was
sure.
an interesting topic.
Well, it
to
sounds like
explore
Rory
too.
was already on board with that.
Yeah,
Honestly, we just haven't
Nice.
gone through we haven't gone through that together yet. It's not been a thing we've gone through, but it sounds like you know what's going on.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Glad we thought to
do-
explore that. Go ahead, Nugi.
I do think it begs the question a little bit because you're talking so much about how you would always want to combo and use other skills.
Mhm.
And let's say that there is a specific playstyle or like an archetype, melee for instance, again, or other spellcasters where there is a combo piece
Yeah,
that
no,
you basically can never ignore. So how do
I
you?
understand what you mean. Yeah,
Not...
it's a delicate balance, right?
Mhm.
The only solution is balancing it
Yes,
well, and
yes.
having the alternative
Right.
is good.
But I think that the
Or
interesting point
just
there is
make
that
it play well.
right, exactly. Well, that's the thing, right? It's the fact that the melee totems, when you're using them that way, don't feel entertaining to do. That is that is part of that big issue, right? Because yeah, as we were just saying, right, like the melee totem might be a thing that I would hope that nothing feels mandatory because ideally, there's enough variety and everything that's not the case. But even if they did, at least if melee totems felt good to use, you could at least, that would be easier to deal with for sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. fair
Now, Rise, if you don't ask your question, I'm going to skip it.
It's a total shift, but I'm asking, how do you feel about item pickup radius heading into PoE 2? Would it be possible for PC players to get a pick up nearby items button like on console, considering we're now getting WASD movement?
So we just had an argument about this right before the podcast, and
Friendly argument.
Friendly argument. yeah. I am of the opinion that we will need to increase pickup radius. There is an argument for how much buy.
Chcą zwiększyć item pick-up
Yeah,
radius.
there's an argument by how much buy.
Łatwiej będzie podnosić przedmioty.
One issue, of course,
10 years. Oh
yeah,
my
one
God.
issue, of course, is how do you indicate to the player that so with WSD, you don't want to have when you click on an item, you don't want your character to move to the item, right? You want it to to stay still because obviously you're moving with WSD. So therefore, there has to be some kind of indication on the hover about whether or not you're in range to pick it up. And so one way to solve that is just to make the pickup radius the whole screen. But I kind of feel a bit sad about that for various reasons, which is why I kind of don't. I'm not really that keen. So we'll have to find a solution to that. It's actually not something we've solved yet. But yeah, it's something we have to do something about it. And that would of course also mean that various other factors relating to item pickups would hopefully get less annoying. And I mean, look, it's going to at least be large enough that like you'll be able to not stand in the ground fire when you will go to pick up your item. And that kind of thing. So
Właśnie,
it'll at least be large
wędki
enough for that,
powinny
but we
być
just
do
have to
tego.
just make
Im
sure
lepszą
that we
masz
get that feeling
wędkę,
kind of
tym
okay
większy
and working
zasięg
out. I mean,
kapu. GGG, słuchacie
the
tego?
thing that came up as we were discussing this was like just related to the whole you should never move when you're not pressing WSD if you're in that mode. It's like, okay, so what happens if there's a lever and you need to, there has to be some amount of your character moves a little bit because you can't, you're not going to stand in the exact pixel that's the exact point where you need to do the lever, right? So there has to be a little bit of that, but we have to work that out.
Yeah. Can you psychically open doors?
Yes. Well, then there's the next thing.
Yes.
Yes. Can you psychically open doors? I mean, obviously the increase. I would actually think we should increase the radius of that even a little bit as well.
Nice.
Because I think like not so much that it would feel like you're not walking up to the door to open it, but like at least enough so that it doesn't feel totally fiddly to be able to do that stuff. So yeah, there's things left to do there, but yes, I do think that radius will have to increase a bit.
That sounds so good. And since you're kind of on this topic, how about when we talk to NPCs when we're like got a menu up and we're getting attacked and there's ground effects underneath them burning us while we're trying to shop in their in-game vendors and
we haven't made this change yet, but I am actually very keen to make it so that you don't have to be right next to an NPC to talk to them, like have the radius of that be increased as well. But there's a few other issues around that I need to talk to our UX
Zwiększony
about.
zasięg gadania z
I
NPC-ami.
think we can improve it.
I otwierania
the way
drzwi.
that feels, so yeah, there's stuff to do there. Yeah.
Alright, good. Glad you're
So,
looking into
but
that.
just to be clear, so the argument was about the amount of range increase on the pickup radius, not whether or not it's a good idea to even
Yeah, it
have
will
that
increase.
in the
It
first.
will increase. The question is how much.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. That's
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, what about a telekinesis button then, like in Diablo 2? You're just opening doors and picking stuff up, but you have to, click a button. Maybe it takes a long time.
Telekineza jak w Diablo 2.
Don't have an opinion about that. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Może.
That was too hopeful.
Nie, chyba nie.
All right, moving away from the quality of life once again. Going to Noogie, you have a question about borrowed power from league mechanics. I'm interested about this one.
Yeah, because we've seen it a lot. So just the 3 last leagues, it was weapon skill trees that then went away. Then it was the 2s that then went away, and now it's charms. Is it a trend that you see happening in PoE 2?
I think it's something we could that we will probably do for sure. Like, I mean, it's nice to have like a way to kind of do a feeling of a little bit of power creep in a league without having to be committing to it sticking around. Is quite nice. So I think it's good to do that. But I mean, I'm not going to say that every league is going to always have something like that, but I do think I think it's a pretty good thing to do.
It's just a thin line to tread if it becomes permanent that you don't want to feel like, oh, now I have to do this league for this amount of time to fill up this slot in the character and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Right.
At the very least, making it far less like in every slot it multiplies it by a certain amount and
Right.
move on to the next league.
Yeah.
These are the reward structures I've been enjoying the most lately, for sure. Like, because they're the most interesting. Like, they inspire build creation. Like, Crucible Trees inspired build creation. This league is nuts for that.
Yeah, it's great when you feel it. It's great when you feel it.
For sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Awesome. So, with Path of Exile 2's enemies becoming tougher and more dangerous in more interesting ways now, can we expect a move away from lingering death effects, things that kill us after the monsters,
świetne pytanie. On death effecty.
loot and whatnot?
Well, we did discuss the loot thing earlier, at least, so that improves that situation. But I do think that death effects they have an important place, and it isn't so much for like you kill the last monster and then the monster kills you after. That's not really what the intention is. The intention is that when you're in a situation where you've got multiple monsters, the lingering death effects of the other monsters are able to cause you to have to change what you're doing with regard to like how you're playing around that, and like knowing that a monster is going to leave a death effect afterwards like kind of can change a little bit of what you have to do with the remaining monsters or when you kill them, that kind of stuff. So
byście mogli
I think
usunąć.
the lingering death effects can do actually have a use for that, and which is the reason why we wouldn't want to get rid of them. Before the call, Rory was suggesting like, should we remove lingering death effects like when the last monster dies, something like that. I don't think I'm actually that keen for that because I think it's not very understandable. Like I don't think it will make sense to the player, very much. But at least the loot pickup radius thing will mean that like that is not so frustrating to deal with. But I do think they do have a place. Like it is important to have those things that can change the way combat feels like in the moment. Like something like you need to have it so that a mod on a monster pack can make it, can change things up. I guess the argument would be that like there's less of a reason to have that on things like rares because that's more likely to be the last thing you kill, which I guess is an argument. So we'll obviously look into that stuff more, I suppose. But it isn't a mechanic that's going away or anything like that.
I think it's interesting the idea of it like shaping combat as combat is going on, and it sounds like the reason to not kind of remove them after the combat is over is because that's difficult to communicate. Is there then potentially another solution to that so that you can do that instead, if that's the only reason to not?
If you have one, I'm open to it. So just
we'll get our top minds on it. Chat.
Yeah.
Interesting thing to explore potentially. Thanks for the insights. Rise, we have a question about respecking. Or do you have other questions maybe this time?
I mean, kind of. As a passionate hater of lingering effects, it mostly does boil down to DD for me. Because if I die to something like a burn and I'm not paying attention,
Tak to nas i umarłych,
that's so
right?
stupid.
We've talked about DD already, and even PoE 1's getting that change. So yeah, like that
change. Yeah.
Bardzo mi się
and
podoba.
I mean, look, that
Poszedł
just
tym
comes down
kierunkiem.
to making sure that they're seeable before the damage occurs, right? Like as long as that's the case, then that's obviously better. Yeah.
Dobrze. Trzeba
Okay, well,
kropla
do you
drążyć
feel
skałę. Trzeba
respecking in the early game should be as
narzekać na DD przy
difficult
każdej okazji.
in PoE 2 as it is in PoE 1, leaving it really open-ended here? Not suggesting
Rescue
anything.
Team pyta, czy
I honestly
respekowanie
sort of
powinno być prostsze w PoE 2.
don't
Zmienianie
feel
swojej
like it's too
postaci.
far off wrong, I have to say. Overall, on balance,
Okay.
on looking at it, I actually think it isn't too far off wrong. That's a pretty short answer, I guess, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, until we really spend a long time playing with the like at mid to high levels, you get the split passives, and how does that change how you experiment and that sort of thing? That might change the answer a bit, but it's hard to know until we
Right.
really got our teeth into it.
Yeah, I don't think it's too far off wrong.
Something Neon said in the previous interview with DM and Gazi was that's what rerolls are for. So I guess that's kind of like if you want to heavily respec, you just
Some
reroll.
extent. To some extent, yeah.
Nie chcą, żeby respekowanie było
Okej.
zbyt łatwe. Chcą, żebyś najwyżej zrobił
Alright,
drugą
Nuki, take us
postać.
away for our next question.
I tyle.
Well, so in the past, there have been issues that have seemed near impossible to fix, at least what you've said. So, for instance, desync was for a very long time is you just have to deal with it. We can't fix it. Are there any things that now that seem possible to fix that might not have been in the past? Open question.
I mean, we've already made a huge number of like massive technical changes that sound subtle, like a frame taken away before a projectile is visible and things like that, that like compound to make the game feel so much more tight and so much more work involved in making it all like perfectly
I
fitting
mean,
together now.
You look at things like WASD, for example. That's the kind of thing that would have appeared to be on the too hard basket,
Yeah.
but you know, we managed it. Like we're trying to be as open-minded as possible with regard to what is fixable, and because ultimately the goal, as I hope it is with any game developer, is to make the game as close to perfect as we can. So I don't think that the attitude of like this is impossible to fix is one that I want to have around generally. You know, like it needs to be like, like it always needs to be like, yes, there is going to be a way, like there will be a way to address this. And so I'm trying to think if there's anything like to answer this question, I guess I'd want to hear an example of something that seems impossible to fix, so then I can kind of think about it. You know what I mean? Like, what's an impossible to fix problem? And then we can see whether or not it's possible. Because as I said, I try to kind of always think like, well, we can. You know, as
I mean, I think a good
overall-
example was actually the pickup radius, because that did seem as if it's something. No, we can't really do anything about it. And that seemed to be kind of the answer we got for a long time. So that was like very surprising to me, at least.
Right.
Oh,
Well,
death
because
logs and
it's-
damage recaps.
It's not like that's impossible to fix as such, right? It's not like a technical challenge. Like desync is a technical challenge, right? Like it's we just
Right.
have to deal with this. Whereas pickup radius is just like, well, we could increase that number any time. It's a question of are we actually like the problems that like what you're okay when you're looking at something like that, what are we concerned about? Well, it's sort of like one of those game feel things of like, you know, just making the like the problem of that is a more nebulous problem of like
Right.
item weight. Like, does it feel like you're actually in a world? Like, do you just have mystical power? Like, you know, like the more sort of like mystical powers of like, you know, that break the kind of like world feel you do, the further away you get from this feeling of like that the world is actually physical and real and that it's serious and this kind of stuff, right? And so it's like on some level, I think that it's important to reevaluate those sometimes, which is what the pickup radius change is about. And like, but at the same time, if you just go too far with that, you can make the game feel like it doesn't really have the same importance and weight that it had before. And it's like, it's really hard, I guess, for people to accept those kinds of arguments because no one change is the thing that does that. It's the collection of everything together that somehow makes the game feel real. And like, so whenever we're making that kind of argument, it's honestly, it's like, I think this is the kind of arguments that game developers hate having to have with their audience because like, yeah, you're right. Like the game would be better if the pickup radius was larger, right? Of course, like that would be easier. Like your game, like, you know, that sort of like, it's like, and then on the other side of that argument, it's like some freaking nebulous thing about game feel that like, oh, well, what the hell are you even talking about? You know, like I mean, like it's hard to even, it's really hard to balance that. But yet it's like, yeah, it's just one of those slippery slope things. So yeah, I don't know. That isn't really answering anything, I guess, on some level. But I guess what I'm just trying to talk about is just the tension that game developers have with their audience is often around these type of things, where it's like, well, yeah, obviously we could do that, right? There is nothing stopping us from making that change. Why aren't you? Well, that's a very hard question to answer, right? Like, yeah.
Obviously, I could give you a headhunter. It would be great for you.
Yes,
Your
yeah,
game
of
would
course,
be much
right?
more
Yes,
fun,
absolutely.
right?
We
Why wouldn't
Headhunters
we?
for all is a possible thing, right? We can go to the database, import Headhunters for all. Why not do that, right? Why do we not just do it? You know, so yeah,
I mean, it kinda...
these are the hardest questions to always answer.
I
Why are you
generalnie
not giving me the
mówią,
exact thing
że
I want? Yeah,
takie rzeczy typu
Kinda-
zwiększenie
it's
tego
hard
radiusu,
to-
ciężko stwierdzić, czy to serio
yeah,
jest dobre dla
I
gry,
don't know.
a jak już zdecydowaliby się na
for
to
reasons that it
wcześniej,
would make the game
no to
worse in some way that's hard to quantify.
raczej społeczność nie pozwoli im
Yeah,
cofnąć
I
tej
guess that's all
zmiany,
we can say.
więc
Not
muszą
that
być z
PoE
nimi bardzo
2
ostrożni.
seems like an amalgamation of that altogether. It's just kind of okay. Let's just make another game altogether instead of
Sure,
continuing.
yeah, for sure.
Something I never
That's all
expected
good.
to see was the ability to pause the game in single player. And as someone who recently became a father, I'm super excited about that and very interested in some of the specifics.
Tak,
So
możliwość
you were
pauzowania gry.
Go ahead.
Pause is
zajebista.
absolutely one of those things where, like, I think exactly one of those things where it's like,
Yeah.
it seems impossible for reasons that aren't exactly real. It's just like, well, you know, we're a multiplayer game. We kind of pausing, and it's like when you really like, if you come into that with the question of, well, what if we just stopped making excuses? You know, like what if we actually just didn't have that excuse and then we actually took it seriously? And it's like, well, yeah, I guess we could do it. And then at that
Love
point,
it.
it's like, well, yeah, I guess, you know, like yeah, I guess we can do it. You know what I mean? Like that it is just really that, I guess.
I need to ask myself that sometimes. What if I just stop making excuses?
Exactly. Yep.
So some of the specifics on that I'm pretty interested in, and I saw a question in chat just now actually. So could you have something like pause on disconnect, or is there a reason that's not a good idea?
Pause on
Well, the
disconnect.
instance does pause on disconnect if you're in single player.
But you're like
Whoa.
not dying after you disconnect, or is that just in that time lag there? Is it?
Well, hang on.
After
Well, hang on.
6
Hang on.
seconds, it
to be clear,
activates?
though,
Hold on.
Right. Okay. So just okay.
You guys don't know that.
When I say disconnect, what I mean is when the server determines you have disconnected.
Yeah.
Right.
there's a lag
Because
there.
like we don't know you're disconnected until that happens, right? So the
Yeah.
question is like it is impossible to understand like is this lag or is this a disconnect?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's the thing. So you know this is an interesting question, not one that I have considered before, but like. No, okay. So here's the thing, right? You can always simulate lag on the client. So therefore, we have to very carefully think what could a cheat possibly do
Lag switch.
if they have the ability, you know. So I just have to think about that. But I guess since the client can pause the game anyway, you know, why couldn't we?
Oh.
Yeah, why couldn't
Oh.
we?
If the client hasn't sent a packet to the server for some very short amount of time, pause the instance in single player.
O!
Oh.
Hold up.
Is there a
Pauza
reason
gry?
we couldn't do that? Let me just think about this.
Przy
Let me just think
diskonekcie?
about this. So, what could a cheat? Because you can pause the game anyway. So, if the client is capable of pausing the game at any time, then I don't see a reason why we couldn't pause the server if you're lagging. I don't see a reason why we couldn't do that in single player.
O!
I mean, you can pause at any time by hitting the escape key.
Yes, that's what I mean.
but
You can
there's
do
no
that. So there
advantage
really is
to
no
it.
reason why we couldn't do that.
Oh, the
I think-
follow-on
I remember that was like a giant point of contention because obviously a lot of hardcore players
Yeah,
are
yeah, no,
listening
for
to
sure,
this
for sure.
and literally
Sure.
Dla graczy
Yeah.
That would
hardcora to
actually
jest
be a
byłoby
fix to the
ogromne.
hardcore lag death problem.
Jakbyśmy przestali ginąć
Yes.
od lagów i DC.
Because I remember when Shaper
yeah,
used
yeah.
to pause the entire game, a lot of people brought that up, and there were some
GIGA.
interviews with Chris where it was a little bit unclear because it did seem like you guys were able to slow down the game or stop it altogether pretty much immediately when that was recognized, but then it was never and people use that as an argument for the 6-second timer, and what I'm hearing right now is really good. I really like it.
In multiplayer, it has to be that way. We can't pause the instance in multiplayer, of course, right?
Right.
And we still can't tell the
Yeah.
difference between lag and not, and like getting disconnected is no fun when you just have a 1 second lag spike when you don't even know that you normally had it. Like this kind of thing sucks, right? There's a reason why you want to have the timer be some amount more than instant, you know. But yes, we could in single player because if you're not getting disconnected, certainly leaves much of an issue. So yeah, there is actually a world where we could pause the instance in single player. Yep. No. Okay. Well, I will look into that. That could be a thing.
Obviously,
Spróbują.
like, temper
Spróbują tak
expectations
zrobić.
a bit, because like I imagine you have to explore the nuances
Yeah,
of this,
yeah,
and
yeah.
whether
But
there's any technical
I don't
limitations.
immediately see a reason.
Ale
I don't
będzie.
immediately-
Jak to wejdzie,
I do
to
not
będzie nas
immediately see a
najlepszy
reason why we
zmian.
couldn't do that. So
Whatsoever.
I'll talk to Reese, who would probably be the best person to talk to about this,
Rampant hype. Let's
and
go.
like see if there's any reason why we can't just implement that.
Well,
Sure,
hot damn, I'm
why
glad
not?
I asked this question.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure.
Whoa.
For sure. It honestly had not been. I had not connected pausing and hardcore death as like lag spikes as a thing yet in my mind. So that connection was very good of you to point out.
Fajnie, czyli ten wywiad wpłynął na ich decision making
Yeah, for sure.
potencjalnie.
6-second timer as an impossible to fix issue. It seems
Yeah,
like.
Dziękuję,
no,
Rice
there you
Cookie.
go.
Apparently,
Taking them out.
maybe.
Sure.
So I still had some other questions about the pause thing. You mentioned in
Yeah.
like one of the previous interviews the idea of like being able to look at debuffs and things like that
Yes,
that's
yes.
on your character and
Yeah.
how that's difficult to do in current PoE. Can you do that while paused?
Yes.
Yes, you can. So you'll
Amazing.
be able to mouse over.
You'll be
I
able
can
to look
pause
at
in the
your
boss fight and look at the
character sheet and-
mechanics.
Yeah, look at your skills and see what your skill is currently, what its current DPS is in that exact frame. You
And
definitely
things like
won't.
that.
So good for testing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You won't be able to change your gear and passives out
Yep.
mid
Fair.
battle.
Yeah.
That
yeah,
would
but
be
you can
pretty
inspect-
degenerate.
But the intention is that you can inspect your character and various things that you want to do.
Yeah, so
while
you can open
paused,
up your
which is-
character screen and
Yeah, yeah.
Możesz w trakcie walki
like that.
spauzować,
Chilling fine.
zobaczyć
Okay,
swoje buffy,
great.
debuffy,
So what happens if
swój
you get like a
ekwipunek,
trade message or something like that? Can you
statystyki,
like chat
trzeba
with
by na
people
pewno
with
masz, nie wiem,
pause?
skapowany
chat with
dres,
pause, yeah.
cokolwiek.
Yeah, and like queue up a trade, like pause and discuss a trade, because that's like a new
yeah,
thing to
yeah,
trade
sure.
right
Why
now.
not? No reason
Yeah.
why not.
O!
Yeah, like
Albo pauzujesz w trakcie
non-combat
walki i
and, like,
odpisujesz
all
gościowi
non-game simulation
na
packets,
tradzie.
well, to be technical about it, still work while paused. So there is no reason you can't do any of the things that are outside the like game simulation
Nice.
while you're
That's
paused.
Zajebiste.
amazing
Like,
trade
accepting
quality of
parties
life.
and all those other
Yeah.
and all those
Yeah.
other things like
Because
that.
right now, like being in the middle of a boss fight or
Okay.
something, you're like trying to type to someone, like,
Yeah,
give me
yeah,
that, I'm in a
yeah,
boss
for sure,
fight, and you
for
like
sure,
send it to the wrong person.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Press escape and take our time.
Yeah, you'll still have to like open the portal to get out of the boss fight. So if you
Sure,
like,
yeah, that's fine.
die when trying to open the portal and fail
Nie,
to
nie,
make that
Brzeszu.
trade, that's on you. But
Single oznacza, że grasz
Is
solowo po
pausing
prostu.
restricted to?
Czyli będziesz mógł
Because you said that
pauzować nie na
obviously you
single
can't do it
player,
in
bo nie
like
będzie
group
nigdy
play,
single
but
playera, tylko po
if
prostu
the players
grając
are in the
samemu.
same party but they're not in the same instance, can you still use the pause?
Yeah, of course.
And then what happens if somebody? You could.
Yeah.
So then
if
what
someone-
happens if the game is
actually,
paused?
Now, what happens when someone joins the area while you're paused?
I think
Exactly.
the
Area
Ah.
unresumed. And this is important to know because if you're in a party, you are in danger of someone unpausing you. So you just have to be
Yes.
aware
Yeah.
of that, right? Like you have to be aware of that.
Okay, so that's
This
just
is
something
something
that's gonna work like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
In fact,
wow.
I believe we even discussed this, although I don't believe I told any of the UI guys to actually do it. But I remember at the time we discussed putting a warning on the screen when you're paused in party that says,
Right.
warning, you could be unpaused by another player, just so you know that, like,
Wow,
you know,
okay.
yeah, I think
PK
one of you guys
time, yeah.
actually had that. I remember when we were
That's
discussing
brutal.
pause originally, that did come up as a thing that we had to make sure was on the screen, just so you know,
To
like,
nie,
you know,
Brzeszu.
you're in danger of someone else. Because the other thing as well, by the way, maybe something I don't know if we even mentioned before is you can pause in party play if everyone pauses. Like if everyone
A,
pauses,
i
escape,
można
pause.
grając w party też
So you
spauzować.
actually can, but the thing is, that's the
Tylko
other
muszą
case
się
where
wszyscy
people
zgodzić
warning on
na
the screen.
pauzę,
It
jak
could be
chcecie
unpaused at
dwa.
any time because another
Yeah.
party.
Znaczy
Anyone
nie, bo
who
to
does
dwa
this at a pause
drugą
Yeah, yeah,
stronę.
yeah. But you actually can pause in party play if that's the
Yeah,
case
nieważne.
also.
Oh, great.
Does it like
Oh, very
prompt
useful.
a pause vote or?
It's not
No,
a
you just
vote.
pause.
Once everyone is paused, the game is paused.
Yeah, so there'll be like a thing that says
Oh,
so and so
okay.
Yeah,
is
yeah.
Like that,
paused or
okay.
whatever. Yeah,
Yeah, so if everyone does that, it just
yeah, that's what voice comes
Oh,
for.
and,
right?
and,
Oh,
and
okay.
game auto pauses when you like do things that cover the whole screen, like open the passive screen and things like that. Will auto vote for pause, if you will. I mean, like you are considered to be I want to pause when those screens are open. And so then yeah, the
Mega dobrze
everyone is
brzmi
looking
to,
at
co
passive,
dzisiaj
then yes,
się
the game will be
nasłuchaliśmy.
paused.
Naprawdę
Cool.
dobrze.
Or pushing escape or whatever.
Wow.
it is. So,
To z
Oh, that's so
disconnectem,
good for like co-op play with like a new player or something. Oh,
yeah.
awesome.
to z itemami.
Yeah, so if you like, I want to go to
pauzą.
the bathroom, you can.
I'm so
you know,
amped.
as long as you trust
What
your
the-
friend, to,
Yeah.
as long as you
Oh
trust
my
your
God.
friend, then you can go do that when you're in party
It's
play.
amazing.
Sick. All right.
I look forward
anyone...
to the rip clips.
Yes, the PK ones. All right. Did anyone have any follow-up questions on that before we move on to Rise's next question? Go ahead, Rise.
Is it the really long one?
Yeah,
Is
do
that
it.
one? Oh,
Grace.
this was mostly answered already. It was
Yeah.
about the items and the general concern about having to, instead of clicking a Chaos Orb 1,000 times, picking up 1,000 items or 500 items and clicking a Chaos Orb 500 times.
Oh, we can go to the next one then. All right, skip Rise. Noogie.
Skip me.
Well, so you've designed 40 leagues or so far, a little bit more, I think. What are some of the learnings you're bringing forward to PoE, and can we expect, like, what can we expect?
It's honestly really hard to answer this question because there's like a million small lessons all the time.
Yeah.
But I think like the overall formula of leagues that we've had, I think it is good. And what I guess that formula is kind of things like, okay, first of all, it needs to affect the game from the start, which like, you know, like commonly it can't just be something that happens at endgame. You need to have some kind of meta progression system. You need to have something that changes up combat. You need to have some kind of storyline element. You need to have a thing that affects crafting, like some item acquisition in some manner, like that, you know, there's items you couldn't make before. Is that the whole? I feel like there's at least 2 more things on that list that I didn't mention, but like there's the list of things that we have to checkbox that a league has for it to actually be a compelling piece of
Mają
content.
checkboxa,
And those, I guess, were sort of
checklistę
developed
rzeczy,
over the
które musi
years,
spełniać liga
you know,
obecnie.
to understand how to do a league. So that's obviously really important. But I mean, there's just a million tiny learnings, and I'm sure you could rattle off a few
Yeah, I mean,
random things.
The fact is that a lot of it we're not thinking about. We're just like, oh yeah, we've known from past experiences
Mm.
it doesn't work, so we don't even bring up the possibility of that mechanic or something like that.
Right, you know, and sometimes there are things we will forget from time to time that we learn again. You know, like I think I mentioned already, the one where we making sure that you always have to earn difficulty. Like, you know, like you can't give the player difficulty for free, like because it leads to issues. Like, you know, we had to learn painfully again in the current league. So things like that are like lessons that like are less obvious, but like we kind of get there. But yeah, like sometimes it's easy to forget some of those lessons with so many expansions. It's like, oh crap, we made this
Jonathan
mistake. we made in
sugeruje,
the
że na
past, and,
przykład
like,
w
somehow managed
Affliction
to
popełnili taki
noob
błąd,
into it again.
że
You know, like
nawet
that kind of
nobek
stuff
z
will
nubskim
happen from
buildem
time
jest w
to time,
stanie
of
sobie
course, but,
maksymalnie
you
zjusować
know, ideally
pyłkiem
we've learned our
mapę,
lessons.
a
from
według
what we've
nich
done.
zjusowanie maksymalne mapki
Have you considered at
powinno
all
wymagać
diverging from the
odpowiednio
script and
silnego buildu.
maybe going for something completely different with a league? So, I mean, for instance, maybe have something that's not as connected. Because a lot of people have been asking in the past for having a completely separate thing to mapping, for instance, where it doesn't,
Right.
like, where it literally goes a different way.
Right. I mean, we've done that occasionally. Like, I mean, I guess you'd say Delve was kind of one of those type of things.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we do occasionally, but I will say that it is a lot harder to make that kind of content when you have to do it completely from scratch without any kind of base to work from. So that just makes it a little bit harder. But I mean, you know, like we like to try and do different things all the time, ideally. So yeah, there are hopefully, you know, it's funny. I think actually that PoE 2's development has actually reduced the amount of that we've been able to do in PoE 1 because, like, the environment team is very much busy, you know, and so like during
reason.
PoE 2's development, we've had less of that stuff, honestly, than what we have had in the past. So once we're no longer kind of doing that, I think it will be easier to have more of those kind of larger, like, you know, like
Cool.
do a league that has a whole environment thing going on.
Spodziewają się,
and,
że
you know,
ligi
that will be easier
generalnie
to do at that point.
będą
The stuff that we have done for like,
większe.
new environments and stuff for the PoE
Po tym,
1
jak
leagues
już skończą
has
się
been
oczywiście
very
prace nad
clever
PoE 2.
use of PoE 1
In some-
PoE 2
In some cases, you know, it's funny because actually, like PoE 2 has been in development so long now that we have assets that are old in PoE 2 that we're replacing, and then we can use those assets in PoE 1.
Like hand-me-down clothing.
yeah, like it's kind of sad. It's like, oh yeah, this is too old for PoE 2
A,
now.
to
we need to
zabawne
use it
akurat.
in PoE 1. It's kind of
Powiedział, że mają asety, no bo PoE 2
I feel
jest
like we
już,
can do
tworzą
different
ponad
flavor
7
territory
lat
at this
i
point,
asety
but-
mają w PoE 2, które są już za stare na PoE 2, pomimo tego, że
it's
powstały
been a
pod
long
PoE
road
2,
for sure.
ale mogą je przynajmniej użyć w PoE 1.
Are you still planning on having like the 3 to 4 month
Jako nowe.
league cycle? And has that proven to be practical? I noticed we've gone to 4 months a lot lately.
Yeah, you know, I feel sad about that because really we still want it to be 3 months, but just
Okay.
once again, it's just been, it's like getting PoE 2 across the line has just meant that some
Yeah.
4-month ones have kind of snuck in there. And I expect and have no reason to not believe that once we get PoE 2 out, that both PoE 1 and 2 will both have 3-month expansions going forward from that point onwards.
Right.
3 months is the optimal amount of time we have discovered. So, you know, like any shorter and it feels like too much, any longer.
Mają
it's,
nadzieję, że wrócą
and-
do
and-
normy, do starego
we're leaving,
13-14 tygodniowego cyklu.
for lack of a better, well, it is really money, I
trzymiesięcznego
suppose at the end of the day,
ligi,
leaving money
jak
on the
tylko
table
też
because
PoE
like having
wypuszczą.
more expansions in here directly translates to, you know,
Yeah.
to more players and more money, right? Like
Sure.
at the end of the day, that's what it's about, right? So like, if you really get down to it, then sure, yeah, like, you know, like 3 months is the optimal amount of time we've found for doing that stuff.
And you're planning on alternating the league cycles between the two games?
Yeah, well, as we said, we're going to do a 3 month cycle for both.
Yeah.
So like it's 1 month between a PoE 1 to PoE 2, and then 2 months from PoE 2 to PoE 1.
Gotcha.
We don't necessarily expect
makes
everyone
sense.
to play both games. I mean, there will be people who have an appetite for a lot, and those people will be able to play both. But I think there will certainly be people for whom they just play one or the other, and that's fine too. And we want to make sure that if you're one of those players, like we wouldn't want it so that like so what you were suggesting there maybe was that it's like 3 months, like so that would.
No, I meant
If
like
it was
1 or 2
3
months.
for each one, then that would mean that
Staggered.
you'd have 6 months between a PoE 2 a league and the next, and that would be too
Yeah.
long for people who just play that one game. So we do have to actually have both.
Yeah, no, I figured they'd just be slotted in between each other in terms
Yeah,
of their
slot it in
release
between each
cycle.
other so that we don't, so they don't overlap.
Yeah, great. So changing topics a little bit, a super interesting thing I learned about at ExileCon from chatting with some devs, which I don't know has been talked about that much, but is pushiness in Path of Exile 2's combat, this concept.
Right.
So the idea that different characters, enemies, and skills have different weights, and
Yes,
they can
yes.
allow them to push entities out of the way, or even like push them into walls and stuff like that was being
Yeah,
discussed.
yeah. So
How that affects
Go on.
content, and any updates on that?
I guess there's not really much changed about it, but ultimately, yeah, like in case people don't know about it, in PoE 2 we made it so that everything, every monster has a pushiness value, which is the degree to which they can push other things apart, and things that have lower pushiness get pushed by things that have higher, and there's like various ranges and,
No, może
and
będzie
things
można
around
się
that, and
pchać
all
w
skills
płetwa,
also
to
have
jest
this, and
bardzo
all, in
ważne.
fact all movements have this as well, attacks and so on.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I mean, it's interacted with some other things, like, for example, knockback now has more of a sort of compounding thing, while lots of little pellets that have a little bit of knockback will combine into a big one that can hit a monster. And if that's a big monster, it'll be knocked back less, but that monster can then push other smaller monsters that's affected by its pushiness after
Yeah,
it's
there's
been
all
knocked
sorts of
back,
stuff going
so-
on here. Like, and I think that there's a few different levels of it as well. Like, you can, normal pushing, will, like, there are different levels of, like, okay, so sometimes when you push something, it can be pushed into other things, but won't continue to push those things further. And then in other cases, you can pack whole groups of monsters right up against a wall so they don't. But we're trying to avoid all cases of intersection. Like, we never, like in PoE 1, intersection happens a lot more, and I really hate that stuff because it means that it makes the world not feel solid, and things can go through each other. And so in PoE 2, part of the reason the system exists is because I was determined that we will not have a game where things penetrate each other as a matter of course. I mean, there are still some cases where that can happen. But
Nie chcę,
in
żeby...
general,
Ale czy będą
things
chcieli phasing w takim
don't
razie?
intersect.
Bo nie
They
chcą,
push
żeby
each other out of the way,
nie
and
chcą,
like
żeby
everything feels consistent. And
gracze i
so,
potwory
yeah, that
wchodziły w
that makes
siebie.
it feel,
Chcą, żeby mogły
so
popychać się
feel a lot
nawzajem. Na
This
przykład
whole
ciężki
conversation that I had at
potwór
ExileCon came
duży
up
będzie mógł
because I was talking about one
odepchnąć
of the big issues I
małego
felt with the
gracza albo
demos
małe
was body
pobliskie
blocking and the
jednostki.
lack of ability to be able to maneuver around that. And I assume phasing is probably gone in PoE 2.
Oh,
right?
phasing.
I can imagine that's a big thing. So
Tak, nie będzie
then the
phasingu
idea is
płetwa,
that
potwierdzili.
will like the player be able to effectively walk through very small, low pushiness value mobs, or maybe use abilities to move them out of the way to be able to do
So
that?
if the monster is small, then so most player abilities that have movement in them increase your pushiness value a bit, and that is so that yes, you can push small mobs aside as you're doing those kinds of abilities, and that can vary based on the skill. Rory probably has more
Yeah,
like
I mean,
specifics.
a lot of different builds have different tools in their toolkit to escape those surrounded situations by either getting bonus pushiness, but many of them have a situation where, like, 3 really large monsters surrounding you are just going to block you in, and you have to
Right.
find a clever way to.
You
not
do
die.
have to actually be able, you do have to think about, like, are there too many monsters here for me to be able to handle? Like, that should be a thing, and the blocking is
goal,
part
right?
of that. Like, I don't know if the
ciekawe.
hyena fight.
Yeah.
Czyli
That
moby
was a good
będą
example.
mogły cię zbodyblokować.
Yes.
Jakbyś był
But the thing is,
otoczony przez
that one
duże
was
potwory,
intentional. Like,
to masz
I
problem.
wanted people when they play that to be like, "Oh, Jesus!" Like when the hyenas come, like I was like, I want the reaction to be like, "That's way too many hyenas." So that's kind of like a fun element of that. But one thing that you might not have been aware of in that fight is you technically can control the number of hyenas because they build up slowly over time, and there's a way to make them come early so that they don't overwhelm you. And there's like there's actually mechanics around that a little bit in that fight as a thing, by the way. But,
It's also like that specific character that was playing in that fight had like one tool that they could maybe get out of the situation with.
was the
There was
issue.
that's true. That's true.
Characters would have
That's
different
true.
options, and
Yeah,
maybe if you were playing the Huntress, you might have picked a different skill that would get you out in a more convenient way.
Yeah. But I agree. There needs to be tools to be able to deal with those kinds of problems. But I also want to make sure that intersection is not the solution. Like, I just don't like intersecting very much, and yeah, like most like any kind of game that you would consider an action game, I would say does not have things that intersect with each other. Like that's just not a thing that good actions games have. So therefore, we need to solve that problem as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is pretty interesting in terms of design space because it allows you to do something like a Huntress who's a bit more like lithe and graceful, can jump over monsters, whereas someone who's like one of the brutes could effectively just toss them out of the way or push through them.
Exactly.
So
And the other thing as well is that player size, like in fact, wait, did we do the thing in the end where we reduced player size during the like the dashes, like for killing time?
No, it's more that the player is pushier than their size would normally imply.
Yes,
Right.
yeah.
that's what
Jak
dodge roll.
daszują, to
Was it?
No, the dash. So we're talking about
Łatwiej
killing
ci
palm, where you
Okay.
where you
popchać
get
przeciwnika.
and then
Ah.
getting thing right. So there's things like that. Like there's tweaks we had to do to kind of make it feel right, so that you can because you can get through spaces with a skill like that because they're pathfinding that you don't feel like you'd normally be able to get through. Like you just kind of squeeze through and it kind of looks okay. So yeah, it sort of works.
That really fits like the monk aesthetic and everything. I think one of the issues that maybe cropped up in the demos was that the dodge roll didn't seem to have any pushiness, which meant in that high inner fight people were just rolling in place, which A looks a bit dumb and I think B felt really awkward. Is that something you're looking at?
I don't know.
It's a tricky one because you don't want
Yes.
dodge roll to be like just get out of most situations without any
sure.
threat. Like,
But the
because
thing
it's
that there are
weaknesses.
two things I want to say about that though that matter, and one of them is that you melee there's you don't get hit by melee attacks while you're dodge rolling for at least for most of the time of it, and at ExileCon we still had that stunning issue where you were getting stunned by small attacks way too much, that one changed the feel quite a bit from when you were playing, because I know that was a big issue for you for sure.
Na Exile-konie
So
na becie
that
za
stunning
łatwo
thing
było, można
did
było
make
dostać
quite a big
stuna.
difference, and so like the ExileCon build in particular was too hard for that reason.
Tłumaczyli
It would
potem,
sort of
że
be
to był
interesting
trochę
actually to
bug.
get you to play again now with that change and see whether you feel the same way.
Okay.
So we'll have to look into that later on. But we might be able to sort that out. But it'd be interesting to see whether you feel the same, because I do agree that like it was too much there for sure. Like we need to improve that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll play,
Yeah,
sure.
There's definitely a thing of you feel like you should dodge roll in some situations where you are better standing your ground and attacking, and I
Yep.
don't know whether that's a thing like you just get the hang of it
Right.
over
But
time.
you do also need like so there's this feeling of stickiness a little bit where you stick to the monsters a little bit that you need to have a little bit of, and the stickiness is caused by the stuns that you receive, where effectively like because that's how you know that you went in too deep, and so there's that little just bit of feeling of crap, the monsters have kind of got me.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that, then it just feels like you just walk past them like ghosts and they don't matter.
Yeah.
Like it's funny because in like Baldur's Gate 3 for the D&D system, they've got the whole attack of opportunity thing that they use to solve that problem, but you need some way to make it so like in order to make it so that there's a feeling of kind of the front line of combat and kind of where you have like to have some kind of element of like not feeling like there's a bit of danger when you get close to the monsters. You need some kind of way to make it so that the
it's super
Generalnie chcą,
important,
żeby gra-
and like I agree with that.
Gracze mogli
and
być
that's why I was, like,
zatrzymani
really
przez
excited to hear
moby,
about
żeby
the
czuli
pushing system, 'cause it
niebezpieczeństwo.
seems like a big
Yeah, yeah.
solution to
No,
a lot
but
of the
that
issues
does
with
make
that,
it-
and actually
you need
enhances
skills
that.
to do that.
Yeah, like it creates the front line when you're like effectively pushing the monsters back a bit and pushing them aside and maneuvering them. Yeah, it's very exciting. All right, so we're kind of in a bit more of a free-for-all section. If Noogie or Rise, you want to jump in with some final questions you might have. I also have some more community questions to round us out as well. Did you guys have anything you want to bring up first, though?
Well, to follow on this little note here, stun and pushiness. So like pushiness is just the monsters and blocking you in and all that, right? Like, does it have any relation to actual stun, and how do you solve that? Because
No, it doesn't. So you can push monsters aside and they don't get stunned. And while so actually the other thing, so while you are being moved, you cannot pathfind, but you can initiate actions.
okay,
That I believe.
which means that you could do a spinning attack that sends you forward on the monk, and while you're being pushed, you won't start moving. But as soon as that push ends, you'll continue on with the movement and whirl out of that situation.
So for monsters, what it means is that like the monsters aren't stunned; they're still attacking you as they're being pushed forward, unless you stun them, of course, with the attack you're doing. But they can't move into range of something else. But because when you're pushing them, you are in range of them. Usually, they can attack you during that time. So that's kind of how that is.
Okay.
And do you like how stun currently works? Because if you're given tools to get out of the way or to roll out, stun is one of those things in PoE that can be the most frustrating to deal with, right? To the point where you have to become immune.
Well, I would hope that you don't feel like you have to become immune, but it is something you need to be considering for sure as a player, right? Like it is like that.
Because especially with like cooldowns, if you ever get stunned, it sets it on cooldown, but you never actually got to cast it.
Oh, actually.
Well,
hang on, no. So mana costs are changing in this regard.
Yeah, mana costs are changing, so they're over time. So if you get stunned,
yes, if you get stunned, you don't pay the full mana cost. You only pay the
Right.
part damage. But then for cooldowns.
I mean, we did
No,
like
z
the
tymi
power charge
stanami
spending
to trzeba
skills,
to
we made it
ograć,
don't
bo
spend
to albo
the charge
będzie
of building
wkurzające
points,
mega, albo na
There's
faktycznie
other-
satysfakcjonujące w
Like there
praktyce.
might be more around cooldowns we can think about.
We don't have a lot of cooldown skills that we're
Yes,
using
you're
at the
right,
moment,
you
so
are
it's
right.
probably
There-
not
there's not a lot of cooldown skills,
Okay.
but
Bo
like maybe
stuny
we
w
can
1 są mega irytujące.
consider moving the cooldown take until after a certain
Co się
like that we
dzieje?
can potentially
I
consider
think
doing.
one of the skills we had, there was a long cooldown skill we just made you stun immune for that brief period before it goes off. But with all of these things, we look at the skill for like what the skill should do to avoid that situation.
But I appreciate that. And the mana cost thing was actually done specifically for that issue because, yes, you can spend a huge amount of mana and then fail. And that sort of sucked.
Yeah.
So, like, we appreciate that issue as an issue. But at the same
Right,
time,
okay.
we don't want to be solving this problem by, like, reducing the importance of stunning. No, like, stunning
Cześć,
should be
dobranoc,
important.
Halima.
That's an important
Right.
consideration.
I mean, yeah, in PoE 2, stun is far less chance based, far more like size of the hit against you based. So
Right.
small hits are only if they're like completely surrounded do the small hits even really have a chance of stunning you at all.
Right.
So there's a lot of
Except for when we had that bug at ExileCon. Yeah.
Don't worry about
I
that.
raczej tylko duże hity
Raz,
bym
did you have a
stanowił.
Have you
question about-
maybe
No, go ahead.
Oh, just another follow-up on the stun.
Yeah.
Have you maybe considered a system in which you have a way to respond? So, for instance, I think a lot of Path of Exile 2's design, in terms of gameplay, works similarly, ideologically at least, to Diablo 2, where you have tools to deal with something in a certain fight, and you're clicking the correct button to deal with that in that immediate moment. So if you need to get away, you can get away. If you need to deal damage, you do damage. If you need to debuff, you debuff. Those tools are always available. But when it comes to stuns, it's really never a system that feels rewarding, because currently in Path of Exile 1, if you just get stunned, you're just dead. You can't move, you die.
Tak,
That's how
dlatego
the
zawsze
game
walczysz
works.
That
But have
does
you thought about a
partly-
system in which in
Kapowaniem
PoE2
stuna
you can
powiedzmy.
just, for instance, you get knocked down and then you press a button to recover from that, allowing player to have any sort of response to what's happening in that way, other than just standing still and losing control of your character, which really never feels satisfying.
I mean, at least at the moment, the stun duration is short enough that it's shorter than most people's reaction times. So reacting to a
Okay.
stun is almost impossible.
Right. But also the oh, damn, I had a thing in mind and then it fell out of my head. So
I mean, we have the thing of also
Sorry, I
every
took
time
too
you
long.
get stunned, you get a higher threshold for the next stun, so it
Yes.
takes longer for the next stun.
A,
to
to
go
fajne
through
akurat.
and so on.
That-
Right.
that
Potem jak
occurred,
dostaniesz
yeah,
stuna,
Stuff
masz
there,
większy
but, yeah, you
stun
can still have
threshold,
that
więc ciężej
situation
cię
of
znowu
that
stunować.
300 milliseconds is all it takes for you to.
Oh yeah,
be
that's right. I remember what I was going to say now.
put
So the time to kill stuff does matter for this because, like,
Yeah.
by extending that a little bit, it means that the stun
Yeah.
is going to be less of an issue there. So, like that I think that that can also be a help to that. Yeah.
Yeah, we do expect, especially like a strength character, has more investment in increasing their stun threshold. It's just nature of how you build your character. You'll often just want more stun threshold to make it less likely to be a threat of
Right.
like medium-sized hits stunning you,
Mhm.
that sort of stuff.
All right. We're going to blast through a few remaining questions. Rise or Nig, if you have anything you want to jump in for. go ahead though. Someone in chat kind of brought up an interesting idea that the crafting system currency changes, like the Chaos Orb especially. That seems like it would have an impact on maps and map rolling.
It probably will.
Something that's being
Probably will,
discussed.
yes.
Rolowanie
I agree.
mapek
I don't know if there's
zmieni,
much to say about that, but yes, it'll have an
ale nie
impact on
chcą
it.
mówić zbyt wiele.
That'll be interesting to see how that plays out and how you explore that. Do you have a reveal roadmap for what's coming up in the future?
Not one that's public, but we
Yeah.
will be talking a lot about PoE 2 during this year. I mean, obviously it's the launch year. There'll be a huge amount of stuff going on. Yeah, there's quite a bit to talk about still. So,
Chyba dziękuję ślicznie, Dison.
you should expect them to come relatively.
Trzeci
Siemanko,
poziom.
znowu się spozniłem.
Awesome.
Dziękuję
Rise,
ci
do you have a
ślicznie.
question you want to jump in, mate?
Za trzeci
O, nie,
gier.
I have an artsy
11
question.
Ooh.
We
I have
understand that
just to follow
most...
up on that.
Oh, sure.
Okay, so just to
Yeah, go.
follow up on that, do you have any? So you don't need to spot, but I'm more thinking about ambition. So in PoE 1, I remember how you were talking about Act 10. We're gonna keep going for 10 years. What are your current thoughts of PoE's
aspirations.
future?
I see no reason it wouldn't last as long as PoE 1 has until now, at least, right? Like, why not?
Another 10 years, let's go.
Yeah, let's absolutely, right? Why not?
Hell yeah.
Czyli
Fajnie.
teraz
Of course,
będzie
like,
10
it's
lat
a
po
long-term
E2,
game.
a potem
Kind of the thing, right?
wjeżdżają z P3. Okej.
Rise?
All right, I'm asking the artsy question
Do it.
now. This one's going to be tough. We understand that most microtransactions from PoE 1 will be transferable to PoE 2. You guys have talked about that quite a lot. A lot of people's concerns is how this impacts the game's immersion and aesthetic, particularly in towns and in the general interaction with other players. How do you think these elements from the first game will blend with the new world and atmosphere of PoE 2 without disrupting its unique feel and design?
Well, it's kind of just unfortunately the case that it will affect it, right? Like, I mean, there's not a lot we can do about that. I think that the decision to make the monetization the same across both games was much more of an important and like player positive thing to do
Yeah, for
than
sure.
the downside of that. And ultimately, like microtransactions being what we sell, like, people wanting shiny, flashy things, like that's going to be how it is. And I think that over time, like obviously we've got older stuff that doesn't look as good, but people tend to wear newer stuff anyway. So I don't think it'll be like, I don't think like old stuff looking bad will be that common occurrence for the most part. But yeah, obviously it can happen. I actually, a couple of days ago, was looking at some PoE 1 microtransactions, what they look like in PoE 2, because it's kind of interesting. It's like, you look at them and you're kind of like, okay, well, yeah, like this thing on the screen looks worse than the other stuff on the screen for sure, right? But I mean, it is what it is. Like, it's
I mean, it's still
that's what it looks like. What looked like when you bought it.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of the reality of that.
it's still got like nicer lighting and stuff on
I mean,
it, but you can only do so
well,
much.
I mean, it's
Whoa.
interesting though because there's nicer lighting in the area, but it's still in like.
Opowiadają o tym,
era it's
że
from.
przez to, że
If it's from
wszystkie
before the
skiny z
PBR,
PoE 1 przejdą też do
this
PoE
is
2,
physically based
no to powiedzmy
rendering
sobie szczerze, jak
era,
masz skina
then
sprzed
some of the
10
stuff the
lat,
lighting can look a bit funky on.
ubierzesz
Like, I mean,
go
it
w
still
PoE 2,
works,
no
but
to
it's
będzie
like,
widać, że
it
to jest
certainly
przestarzały skin.
doesn't look as
Więc
nice as what the new
możesz
stuff
go
looks like,
założyć,
but,
ale no,
for anything that's like,
no wiesz.
what was it about 5 years ago maybe when we started PBR, or maybe 4, like I can't remember, but anything post that era looks a lot nicer in the lighting of PoE 2 for sure, just because it's using the new lighting stuff that we did.
Damn.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know, but yeah, I mean, we've got some micros that we sold in 2012. It's like 2011 even, I guess. Those things don't look as good as modern stuff for sure.
Garena Pet and Razor Footprints.
Excuse me, I want the Razor Footprints. I regret missing out.
Yeah, for sure. But geez, yeah, the other day, there was the most ridiculous thing. Someone used that Garena Pet as a stand-in for one of the skills on the Bog Witch. Like it was a skill that had fire, like it was like a fire trail line, and like this Garena Pet just went screaming across the screen with like fire coming out of its ass. Like, and I saw it, and I was just like, "What the hell was that?" Like, I haven't seen this thing in like 10 years. Like, it was just like, actually, it was the most ridiculous moment. Yeah, I was like,
Perfect.
yeah. I think I've got a screenshot of it somewhere. I'll see if I can dig it up. It was like the most absurd thing I've ever seen. Yeah.
Like that's one of the good elements of PoE 1
nice.
that benefits PoE 2.
Yeah.
Where possible, will stash tabs also carry over to PoE 2?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I imagine some
Oczywiście
of them
stasze
might
przechodzą,
not, like if the thing
potwierdzone.
doesn't exist in PoE 2.
I mean, I don't know if there's anything that like there's a stash tab. I mean, they might have to change a bit, but like I don't think there's anything as a stash tab for that's going to be like straight up removed.
Well,
at
you were
least
undecided on
longer
divination
term.
cards last I heard, right?
Well, oh sure, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
there's that, I guess. Yeah, yeah, but I mean, like, sure, like there might be a few things like that, and
Essences, maybe I could see them not being
well, I
a
mean, we'll
PoE2.
have. I'm sure we will have those eventually.
Okay.
So it might be that the stash tab is not there when you first come in, but then when they get added, then
Oh,
they come
yeah.
in.
Oh,
You know,
that's
that
cool.
kind of thing.
Potwierdzone, że kiedyś dodadzą
I gotta
esencję
applaud
w jakiejś formie.
that carrying over. That's awesome.
Right, right.
So will PoE2 move away from the current wealth of splinters, fragments, and shards, or do you see that as a non-issue?
I guess I don't see that as a well. I mean, ultimately, there are two things, right? One of them is we want to have a variety of in-game content to do, and two, we prefer it when those things are tradable. Like, because the alternative to that is like some counter on your character that you can't trade, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, you need to have some form of item that's going to give you grant you access to end game stuff. If we want to have a variety of in-game things, then that means you're going to have a variety of various like keys to enter those things that you can build up to. So it's just kind of how it is, I guess. Like, you know, those things build up, yeah, but yeah, as I said, kind of how it is.
All right. Do you, Razanugi, have any final questions come to mind?
I just have a
byłby
follow-up, I
wyłączony
guess,
pewnie
because we never got an answer on the. We talked about the pickup radius, but what about the singular button to pick something up from the ground that the console has? Is that ever going to be a possibility? You just press
you know, like,
F
pick
and
up
it
all
picks
or
up the thing
something?
that's
I don't
underneath
know if
you.
that's even. I don't. It doesn't feel. I don't have an answer to that really. I have to sort of look into that and think about
Okay.
that one. I don't really have a.
Well, even the one they have in D4, you just use a different button than the mouse button to pick something up. You just allocate it to a different button, and you use that. It's actually I was surprised how good that felt sometimes.
Right. I'll look into it. I'll look into it. All right.
On keybinds, so you're gonna have like a lot of weapon swapping, WSD. How are you gonna manage all those keys that players will eventually have to bind and press?
I just hasn't really been a huge issue for us just when playing, honestly. Like, it's kind of just been fine.
I mean, you don't usually have more than 5 like active using all the time skills, really.
you got stuff you use more rarely that you
Yeah,
use.
you've got more skill. I mean,
Yeah.
some of them are spirit reservations, taking up your gem slots and things like that. Later on, you might put some on a meta gem to trigger rather than doing.
Right. So
Maybe
you kind of
that
end up
sort of
with it
stuff.
being. It doesn't sort of feel that like it's that wrong as far as like number of things goes. And if you're using WASD, so that you've kind of got that your hand there, then you've kind of got the left click also that's not move only
Right.
anymore. To be using
Yeah.
as another skill. So you know that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That hasn't kind of ended up being an issue in practice, I think.
Fantastic. Can we expect to see you guys somewhere else soon, or is there some upcoming reveals that people can look forward to?
So we'll have another reveal not too far away. I'm not going to give you the exact date yet. And we also are just doing more like community podcasts and things like that. You know,
Right.
so we'll be doing one of those every few weeks or so. Yeah, like you know, and it's been a little while since I posted on Reddit because I've been a little bit busy, but I do plan to continue posting on there and doing more stuff. So you know,
I'd say no, that's awesome.
talkative try some more
niedługo
content
reveal
to make a video
Witchki,
about, I guess.
więcej
Um,
podcastów,
so,
ale
Amazing.
też będzie
Thank you very
odpowiadał na
much for your
pytania o
time.
PoE2 na Reddicie
Yeah.
regularnie.
Appreciate
But
it.
yeah, so we'll just I just want to make sure that we're engaging with the community as much as we can. Yeah, that's the idea.
It feels like back in the beta days of PoE1.
Well, it should do. Because
Yeah.
it's supposed to be like, you know, like I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, well, what did we do back then that made us successful? And
back.
thinking like, okay,
Yeah.
let's make sure we're doing all that stuff again. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
I don't want to leave anything off the table there.
Amazing. Thank you both very much, and thank you everyone for watching and for your questions.
Yeah,
See you fine
thank
folks
you.
later. Bye bye.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye bye. Słuchajcie,
Bye.
widzowie. Dziękuję dla tego, kto oglądał,
That
czy
was
to na streamie,
awesome, guys. Holy.
czy na YouTubie.
Let me just,
Ja zaraz zrobimy sobie malutkie podsumowanie najważniejszych, najciekawszych rzeczy. Dobra, jeśli chodzi o podsumowanie tego, co się dowiedzieliśmy się parę naprawdę hypogennych według mnie rzeczy. Na przykład potwierdzili, że zainspirowali się pomysłem, który jeden z graczy im dał na ExileConie, gdzie powiedział ktoś, ale by było fajnie, jakbyście zrobili gem, który pozwala kastować rolując w PoE2. No i stwierdzili, ale zajebisty pomysł. I go po prostu dodali. Tak więc uwielbiam takie rzeczy. Też RiceQT zasugerował, Polak Rodak, kochany, że fajnie by było, jakby skorzystali z tego systemu pauzy i wykorzystali go w taki sposób, że jak zdisconnectujesz, to gra dosyć szybko, żeby... Obecnie jakby DC timer może trwać nawet 7 sekund, a teraz, że mogliby zmienić, żeby jak tylko gra wyczuje jakikolwiek w miarę krótkie rozłączenie, to żeby po prostu spauzowało. Więc to mogłoby uratować no, setki tysięcy istnień, ludzkich żyć, jeśli chodzi o graczy hardcora, w sensie ich postaci, żyć ich postaci. I stwierdzili, ej, nie myśleliśmy o tym, ale w sumie zajebisty pomysł, spróbujemy to zrobić. Kolejna rzecz. Zwiększą nam pick-up radius. Będziemy mogli z większej odległości rozmawiać z NPC-ami, zbierać loot, czy też otwierać drzwi. To ciekawe. Powiedzieli parę innych rzeczy. Generalnie zapowiedzieli, no trochę więcej było takich pogadanego lucie, które się cały czas powtarzają teraz, czyli że na przykład chcieliby, żeby no gracze przede wszystkim nie tak jak teraz, zbierali bazy i po prostu siedzieli nad białą bazą w nieskończoność, tylko żeby bardziej znajdywali ciekawy przedmiot i na tym przedmiocie działali i zmieniali go na bieżąco. I go trochę psuli, może go naprawili, może robili z nim różne rzeczy, a nie, że podnosisz tylko item, skołrujesz go, żeby był biały i potem robisz z nim co chcesz. Generalnie bardziej transformatywne ma być to craftowanie, a nie takie od zera do perfekta, siedząc w hideoutie i spamując alteration orby.